Okay, so let's reel this back in. So we're off now on all this stuff. There was obviously the original conversation that we'll get back to is these flow charts and morality and JF's position. And then there was a middle topic there that we were on for a second, which was just the Ev-Psych. So just with Ev-Psych, I think you're a bit more skeptical than me here. I think I'm pretty persuaded by the inductive evidence on a lot of these cases. But if we want to just get to similar ground here, fundamentally denying Ev-Psych, I mean, you can deny the specific stories and say you want to buy the specific Ev-Psych stories that have a ton of evidence that it's visible cross species, where it's getting ridiculous to say that this isn't the product of some specific evolutionary process that happened. Okay, how do I say this? If you want to if you want to say that you're only going to believe specific Ev-Psych stories with a lot of evidence that are very stable, that's totally fine. But to pick a problem with Ev-Psych generally, to me, that's the same as picking a problem with evolution, because psychology is just our brain working, and our brain is a product of evolution. It sounds like at that level, you're not disagreeing. You're just saying some of the stories are needing more evidence to persuade you.
And another thing is evolutionary psychology means something much more specific than our psychology evolved. It sounds, because of the name of it, it sounds like it just means that there's an evolutionary explanation somehow, somewhere for our psychology. But it actually is a couple of theses tightly woven together. Nobody disagrees that brains, and thus our psychology, evolved. The specific question is the brain massively modular? I would say no. Certainly it's modular in some respect, but not massively modular. That means there that I am not an evolutionary psychologist. And the second thing is I don't think necessarily that all traits have direct natural selective explanations.
I don't think all traits do, but let's just look here, because I don't know if you can say evolutionary psychology is the same thing as believing in massive modularity. Theoretical approach to the sciences and natural science that examines the psychological nature from a modern evolutionary perspective. It seeks to identify which human psychological traits are evolved adaptations, that is, the function of natural selection and sexual selection in human evolution. So, I mean, JHC, I'm gonna take a bit of issue with that. I don't know a whole lot here. That if massive modularity is like super central to Ev-Psych, and like virtually anyone who calls themselves an evolutionary psychologist believes that, then fair enough, I'll totally concede that to you. But when I think just fundamentally evolutionary psychology, I just think the language evolution, psychology, product of evolution, that's obviously true.
Yeah, on that wiki article, just hit Control F and type in modular, and you'll see how many times it's mentioned. It's there might be proponents who can leave that part out, or they tone it down.
Let's just read this. Some evolutionary psychologists apply the same psychology, arguing that the modularity of the mind is similar to that of the body, with different modular adaptations serving different functions. So I see the word some there. Again, this is just wiki, so I'm open to being wrong here. Evolutionary psychologists argue that human behavior is the output of psychological adaptations that evolved to solve recurrent problems in the human ancestral environment. I'm just going to the next use of modular. Criticisms of Ev-Psych involve questions of testability, or this way you're getting at cognition and evolutionary assumptions such as modular functioning of the brain and large uncertainty about the ancestral environment. Importance of non-genetic and non-adaptive explanations, as well as political and ethical issues due to the... Yeah, so that's basically exactly everything you've been saying right there. So, okay, it looks to me... I just do not have enough familiarity with the field, so I'm going to have to say this is the border of my knowledge here. Yeah. If massive modularity is something that is subscribed to by like the vast majority of people who are into Ev-Psych, I don't know enough to say if that's a true position or not, so I would have to take a kind of like agnostic position on Ev-Psych. But I have been thinking of Ev-Psych as just the fact that our our psychology is the product of evolution, and therefore, explainable in terms of evolution. And
Yeah.
I would agree with like Ev-Psych explanations for something like the preference for a hip to waist ratio. Do you take issue with what I'm saying right there?
So far it's kind of neutral. So far, if you're not weighing in on massive modularity, because that's fundamentally the thesis that I think is wrong. And if you're kind of non-committal on that, then we technically don't have as deep a disagreement. Now,
okay.
All of the main people in the field, two being Cosmides, the researchers who essentially invented the field of evolutionary psychology, and who started the UC Berkeley, UC Santa Barbara. California is known for evolutionary psychology. All of them go out there, all of them work in it. They started it, they built it. They're the people who kind of invented this idea of massive modularity. And in fact, I believe that the concept of hip to waist ratio, I think that comes out of their research. I could be wrong about that, but either they talk about it all the time, or that's something that they.
And just remind me here. Do you push back hard on the hip to waist ratio?
Oh, I'm agnostic about it. But that's enough for evolutionary psychologists to think I'm stupid.
Okay, but you don't push back hard on because I'm pretty persuaded on that, to be totally honest. But you don't push back hard when we're getting to the level of like, the correspondent psychology to vision obviously has evolved, or like the a preference for symmetry. Are you going to push back on that?
Yeah, well, if I push back, you mean I'm going to say I'm not committed one way or the other, then yeah. I don't know what the explanation for that is.
Okay. I think that's like not being rude. I think that's approaching a unreasonable level of skepticism. Like, I'm not sure why you're not tipped by the evidence.
Can I come to his defense a little bit here? Because one thing I would also like to point out is with that IQ point thing earlier with the environment. Some of the biggest environmental factors actually happen pre-birth, when like the most fundamental stages of development, the first 9 months. If the mother's nutrition is bad or suboptimal, that's gonna affect the most key and like the most formative developmental stages of a baby. But I would also go further that I'd actually pick a pretty agnostic on those. I would definitely say that not all of evolutionary psychology is bad, but I mean there's a lot of it which is they're way too certain of their claims. And it's kind of like mixed. Like the definition that you were working with earlier, well, it's a product of evolution. Yeah, I would adopt that, of course. But in terms of things being like even things like the hip to waist ratio, I would even hesitant to assert that pretty much every it doesn't even make sense to say something is, well, this genetics leads to this result. It really only makes sense to say these genetics result to this under this context. So you can't even say that like these genes.
Where's the context where someone does not become attracted to a hip to waist ratio around 7?
I mean, it could be a lot of just look at pedophiles, for instance. Whatever factors that.
Yeah, but that's a psychological abnormality, right?
Yeah, but what if you were living in a situation? Well, sort of. It's also a deviation on a trend, but it's what if you were living in an environment where it increased the disposition to pedophilia to a crazy degree. It's not unreasonable.
It could be that somehow there is conditions that made it beneficial to evolve a preference for another hip to waist ratio, but that's not.
Well, it's not even evolving a different preference. It's just the genetics that we already have could vary so greatly. Yeah.
What I'm be clear here. Are you saying that you doubt that the hip to waist ratio preference is genetic?
Well, I mean, everything is genetic. My beliefs that the words that I'm just speaking right now are genetic in some sense, but it doesn't make sense to refer to them in genetics after the fact when they've already been in contact with this society, this environment, and I've had this context throughout my entire life. Oftentimes, thinking about genetics or evolutionary psychology. It's just distracting. Thinking about love and hate in terms of neurocognition and evolutionary psychology, and in terms of genetics, there's actually very little difference between these two things. They're oftentimes inseparable, yet the result that they have on the world and the moral relevance there couldn't be more different. And just subjectively speaking, to subjectively experience love or hate, I mean, that is also a very meaningful distinction,
Okay.
but it's not even that significant in terms of neuroscience.
Well, I'll just lay out my final thoughts on this, and then let's go back to the flowchart. So, I mean, to me, it seems like if something is a human universal, the chances that it's not evolved are pretty low. That's basically how I feel about it. I don't think that's a crazy thing. If we can look cross-culturally, and everywhere you look, people prefer a certain hip to waist ratio, or if you want to go, toy preference as children, and no matter where you look, you see boys preferring things and girls preferring, like just babies within the first few days of birth, and in other species like monkeys, boys preferring objects and women preferring, or girls preferring, like faces and dolls and stuff like this. I mean, the chance that is not evolved seems extremely low to me. Does that strike you as a weird, unfounded statement?
Well, I'm not entirely clear what you mean. Do you mean, do I think that, there's two parts here. Is the hip to waist ratio preference, is that preference genetic? Literally, is that preference in our genes?
Yeah.
I'm very skeptical about that. And two, even if it were genetic, is the explanation natural selection rather than something else? And I'm not convinced of that either.
Okay.
And here's why, right?
Yeah.
You might think that I'm an ultra skeptic or something, but
no, I see it could be a spandrel. It seems like when you start stacking up all the adaptive benefits of preferring a certain hip to waist ratio, it starts looking like it was probably adaptive.
Yeah, so it's very easy to come up with that story, but without, for one, knowing for sure that it's genetic. And I don't mean that I'm going to be uncharitable. If there's some indication that it's genetic, as in, maybe there's a part of the brain that's associated with female preferences when it gets damaged, or it doesn't develop right or something like that due to some genetic deformity or some genetic issue, then
we can predict it by prenatal testosterone or estrogen or something like this.
Sure. If there's a really good way to test, for one, if it's genetic, then half of it's gone. And two, if we have some reason to think that there's a natural selective explanation rather than something else, like does hip to waist ratio, does it really confer an advantage, evolutionary speaking, in such a way that it's really visible to the forces of natural selection? Vision, obviously very, very, excuse the pun, visible to the forces of natural selection.
Sure.
Eye color, on the other hand,
No.
invisible, completely invisible. Doesn't care, as far as I know, as far as anybody knows, no evolutionary advantage one way or the other.
Okay.
So the question is the hip to waist ratio genetic? And two, are we able to tell that it confers a huge evolutionary benefit one way or the other? And I just don't know.
Well, wait, also, I mean, evolution doesn't have to work based on huge advantage. It just has to work on a minute statistical advantage over time, right?
But the smaller the advantage, then the more it starts to look like noise, and the free riders start to become just as viable explanations as the natural selective explanation.
Okay. I think okay, we'll have to go deep on this sometime, because this is like a big rabbit hole right here. But I mean, it seems to me like, yeah, there's things that might not be, directly adaptive that people in Ev-Psych are saying are adaptive, and I get that. Maybe it's a spandrel, maybe there's some other shit going on there, but I mean, I'm persuaded that something is, like, if we look, I'm not the one to argue the details of any of the specific psychological preferences or attitudes or aspects that Ev-Psych would claim are the result of evolution. I don't know all the details about why the hip to waist ratio would be evolutionarily beneficial. I mean, I understand it's got to do with like childbirth and hormone levels, and it correlates to a bunch of information that is like useful that is like predictive of offspring success. So I'm not the one to argue it out. I don't have enough data to. It's like the same way I don't try to argue. I'm not comparing the level of truth and evidence here or anything, but like it's the same way I don't try the Holocaust. It's not because I don't have my opinion on it. It's just I lack the historical evidence to really go and debunk some like denier who's going to go into all this shit that I just don't even know about. But
yeah, that's fair. And look, we all have to. I mean, people try to bait me into talking to the flat earthers on Discord all the time, and I just don't have. I don't have the motivation to talk to a flat earther.
Yeah. No, I'd rather talk to people who disagree about something that intelligent people could disagree. I mean, if you believe the Earth is flat, that actually indicates that you don't have like basic critical thinking skills. So I can understand not wanting to engage in that. Sorry, yeah. I fucking swallowed water when I drank. But yeah, I know I sound like I'm dying. I just would say my basic position, and then you can say yours. Go back to this chart here. But my basic position here is, I know that our brains are the product of evolution. I agree that we should have skepticism towards specific Ev-Psych stories until we've got a lot of evidence. We might have different standards of evidence. I'm persuaded once there's a pretty strong inductive case, at that point I'm going to say it's probably true that it's there because it was adaptive. So that's where I sit.
Sure, fair enough. Yeah, we can talk about this sometime. I'm happy to talk at length about that topic.
Yeah, but yeah, well, sorry, if you have more to say it. But yeah, let's go back.
No, I'm good. Let's look at the chart. So
yeah, okay.
We've gone. So let me just say that.
Sorry, one sec. Was Will trying to say something there too?
I'll talk to you with this another time, JHC, if you have time. I was just gonna say that just the way our brain works and way that it can almost adapt. It's like a kind of like a learning algorithm, and just positively in reinforcement, after the fact. And the most relevant difference between humans and other animals is the prefrontal cortex, the one that finishes developing, after a quarter of a century, like over 25 years of your life. That is the one that is going to be the least constrained by genetics and evolutionary psychology, and the most sculpted by experience and environment. And this is the part of the brain that makes us most human, and what differentiates us the most from animals. If you were to, I posted quite a few different images.
Slides.
Yeah, and they're based off of like really good neuroscience. I was gonna say that I'm a little skeptical like when someone starts trashing evolutionary psychology because like Isaac was kind of concerned about people going too far the other way. But I hadn't heard anything that you had said that was a red flag to me. So.
All right, good. So I'm not I'm not part of some like crazy sideshow at least. Well, look,
Yeah.
I actually take it that the position that I'm endorsing, I actually think that I'm within the majority, and the at least in a couple fields in theoretical psychology and neuroscience. Most of the time, those are not going to be evolutionary psychology friendly in the manner that I defined it. Massive modularity, natural selection, those two things. I think most people would say there's some other explanation or the brain isn't massively modular. In the other sense that Ask Yourself is talking about, where it must have the brain obviously evolved, it has an evolutionary explanation. And then I might have kind of these other things that I think have evolutionary explanations. They might be more friendly to that, but I actually think that that's probably too soft a position to be considered evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, you like another field that would be more in line with you would be like genetic behaviorists too, is not like the evolutionary psychologists. They get a lot of flack, but not all of them. Like I mean, there are legitimate people within the field. It's just that they. It's kind of like how psychology itself had to go through several resurrections and kind of really realize what actually qualifies for real evidence of what can be replicated, and they really do go way too far so many times when it's actually way more complex, like time and time again.
Okay, we can keep definitely going on this, but I say let's go back to yeah. What's up, JHC? I see you're back.
I'm back. Yeah, so
let's do the fucking moral chart.
So let's talk about let's just kind of get a handle. So we've made it down to, I think, are those facts natural facts on the left-hand side, and we had made it to yes. And then we took a short break.
You're looking at the other one. I thought. Oh no, you're right. Are those facts irreducible natural facts? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Go on. I had to find my place.
All right. Okay. So our moral facts, irreducible natural facts. So that's where we made it over there. Over on the right-hand side, we talked about non-cognitivism a little bit. We talked about, I don't know what the hell. I mean, I know Calderon, but I don't know what hermeneutic fictionalism is, so we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah,
that's
I
shortcoming of your teacher.
I mean, I just mute. Yeah, so let's go on just on the right side because we're basically at the bottom there. So irreducible natural facts. I fucking definitely would not say that there might be a lower level when you get to fucking physics or something, but is it irreducible at the level of like I have like this is my moral fucking belief? Hell no, definitely not. So I am a hard no on
that. Moral facts. You say it is not the case that moral facts are irreducible to natural facts. They are reducible, right?
Yeah, I mean it's going to reduce to evolution, culture, all that, and then the level where it might hit irreducibility way below that, like evolution's a natural process occurring to molecules. Those molecules are composed of something. Like if you follow it all the way down the chain to our most base level of knowledge, there's a point where I'll become agnostic about if it's irreducible. But is it irreducible just at the level of have you hit the point where it's irreducible when you're just talking about the moral beliefs? Definitely not. No fucking chance.
Yeah.
You're also a hard no on that, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't think that there are. Yeah, so the position that we're kind of looking at is that we can reduce goodness or something like that a little bit at least. Whether or not it's all the way, what's important is that we can get beyond something like killing or something like that, and we can start. Well, no, forget that. We can talk about other natural features like happiness if you're hedonist, well-being. We can talk about reduction in suffering. We can say that moral facts are in fact reducible to other kinds of facts about suffering. And this is going to be Sam Harris's position, right? Sam Harris thinks that what you ought to do reduces down or is explicable in terms of well-being. And in that sense, he is a reductivist. Non-reductivist would say, stealing is a wholly natural phenomenon. It's not spooky, but you can't reduce it down any more than you can reduce a triangle down. You have to have all three sides connected together in order to have a triangle. They can't be broken down into other parts. So there you go. Same thing with like a bridge, right?
Okay, sorry, I don't know why that, for some reason my understanding broke in the middle of that. Can you do that again?
Sure. Well, let's talk about like bridges.
Sure.
Bridges, you can't have like half a bridge, right?
No.
If a bridge is going to be a bridge, it has to have the whole thing has to be there. And in that sense, a bridge is a sort of like functional whole, right? You can't remove half the bridge and say this is still a bridge. It has to be doing something. It has to essentially allow something to get from one side to the other. There's no such thing as like half a bridge, because there's no such thing as I got you halfway from one side to the other and it's still a bridge. Okay, so there's a group of people who think that just like bridges are natural, moral facts are this way, and you can't really break it down into anything else. So stealing is stealing and it just is wrong, and we can't talk in terms of anything else. So they're kind of like these spooky non-naturalists a little bit, right?
Oh, it's totally weird. Yeah. No, I mean,
so yeah, and so
it doesn't have to be spooky, I guess, but if you think it doesn't reduce past that point, you're just confused about reality.
Right. So it seems like you could ask a further question. Why is stealing wrong? And for a reductivist, that question doesn't make sense. There's something wrong with that question. It doesn't reduce down. You can't ask, why is wrongness wrong? That just is, that's just what it is. It doesn't decompose down anymore. That's just an atomic fact about the world.
It's
so
crazy. Is that a popular position? Because that sounds loony.
Yeah. So on the second chart, if you see Cornell realism, there are all these people at Cornell. I'm going to Google some of their names. I think, David Brink, Spurgeon. Richard Boyd, by the way, is an evolutionary psychologist about morality. But he thinks that it's irreducible. So anyway, Cornell realism.
Yeah.
All of these guys there, it's pretty popular in the sense that, people take it seriously as a position. But it's not like the majority position. The majority position is probably close to what you're left with, which is if you answer no on this flowchart, by far, Railton's reductionism is by far and away probably the most important naturalistic position. And what this says is that our obligations, or what is good, what is right, they reduce down to some other further facts, maybe about human psychology and about well-being is a sort of, well-being really is a sort of psychological fact, right?
Yep.
You can't really have well-being with no psychology.
No, you literally can't.
Yeah. Things about happiness. So if I think that what is good is that which increases happiness, so I could be a hedonist, that's also going to be a reductivist position. Facts about good and bad are going to reduce down to facts about my psychology.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the end of this side of the chart. I would say you're probably like a Peter Railton reductionist, which is a pretty good company to be in.
Where do you
Yeah.
sit, JFC?
Oh, I think I'm probably up at the. I'm either at the expressivist position on the non-cognitivist side. If not there, I'm probably either the judgment-dependent account or the error theorist account.
Okay, so I don't know all these positions well enough to navigate me. What do you think about morality that's different than what I think? Let's argue about it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm since perplexed, so I can pretend for the sake of argument. So let's talk about some reasons why people might be moral skeptics. Let's talk about some of the very generic. By moral skeptic, I'm including error theorists, and I'm including everybody on the right-hand side, the fictionalists, emotivists, expressivists, and then we talk. Prescriptivism isn't on this chart, but it was on the first one that I put up. So one is it just doesn't really seem like what we're doing. So some people actually find expressivism very convincing. All I'm doing is I'm emoting when I say that stealing is wrong. And that really is what we're doing, is you and I are just shouting non-factual threats at each other or something.
Well, wait one sec. I found that very, very persuasive. The thing that you said that got me off of that was that denies that there's ever a level of reasoning to the morality.
Because there's no facts, there's no propositions. We're not speaking in terms of propositions. So here's an example that I think might help. So we're gonna get a little technical for a moment. So if I'm a cognitivist and I think that moral judgments can be true or false, then I hold to what's called the truth conditional theory of semantics, which is that what gives a sentence its meaning is the conditions by which it's true or false. So let's take a very simple one.
That sounds like what I believe, right?
There are 8 planets in our solar system. Mm-hmm. The meaning of that statement is exactly what it would be to make that statement true or false. So my meaning is that there are 8 objects out there, and as long as there are 8 objects and my sentence comes out as true, and now you understand everything to know about what I meant. Okay? So I know that it can be kind of weird. Can you say
what that position was called again?
Truth conditional semantics.
Yeah.
This is by far and away the most important popular position in linguistic meaning.
Okay, because truth conditional semantics, does that mean that it is true conditional on the meaning of the words that you establish?
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know if there's some difference there, but that's what I'm saying. The truth value of moral statements is contingent on how you've defined your terms from the get-go. That's what I've been saying for years.
And it's what generates meaning. Okay? So if I were to ask you, what does the statement "there are 8 planets" mean? What do you mean by that?
It means, oh, sorry.
Well, go ahead, tell me.
I didn't realize. Oh, I thought it was rhetorical. Okay. It means that. I mean, there's always a deeper level you can ask. I know that's going to be open, but you're basically saying that it is true. It is an accurate description of reality to say that there are 8 floating balls out there in space.
Exactly. Good. Now, if in fact there are 8 floating balls of matter circulating around the sun, then your statement, "there are 8 planets in our solar system," is true, right?
Of course.
If there are 9, my statement is false. So the truth conditions of my sentence are what gives it its meaning. What the statement "there are 8 planets" What that means is what it would take to make that sentence true or false. Now, this is a position that minimizes other sorts of things that people think we might be doing with sentences. So this is a very like realist, objectivist kind of position about meaning. Now, it doesn't say that, oh, if there are no minds or something like that, then it would still, there would still be these sentences floating around in Plato's heaven. That's not what it means. It can be about your intentions. It can be about your psychological states too. But at the end of the day, your meaning, what you intend to mean, is just what it would be for a sentence to be true or false. So, on the other side, and I'm actually going to get to an argument for expressivism, is that this leaves out a lot of meaningful sentences that completely ignores the rules of truth condition. Okay? So, they're saying there's meaningful sentences and their meaning cannot be captured by their truth conditions. This is a little bit what we were talking about. We talked about prescriptivism, when I'm trying to do things to you with my sentence that aren't just giving you a true state of affairs. So let's just get concrete, make it specific. That's doing something a little different. There also could be there's extra linguistic things where I say a sentence to you, but I furrow my brow while I'm saying it, right?
Yep.
There are all these extra semantic features that the expressivists say morality is much more like a speech act, where I'm maybe I'm puffing myself up a little bit to try to intimidate you when of course, all I'm doing is I'm saying the word that's wrong. It's an implicit threat. Oh, it's wrong. And if you transgress me, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, there's like a subtle level of that sometimes, depending on the conversation.
Right. So an expressivist says moral judgments are like that. All of them.
What is 1 second? I don't know how I feel about that. I understand that sometimes there is a layer of, it could be a threat, it could be just some kind of like social pressure. There can be something that's conveyed through your word choice or body language or whatever that goes beyond just the meaning of the words, like deadpan. It's like there's something else being shown there. But I mean, I think that it's not like it's all okay, like there's an inescapable level of there's always some level of your mind coming across through your words, right? So that's always there just because we're humans interacting with it. But I don't think that means that all morality is some attempt to like foist your beliefs on others or something.
Sure. Just and we don't have to go too far down. Let's just understand one of the arguments against, right off the bat, you might be thinking, well, of course moral judgments express beliefs, because I always say things like it's false that we ought to eat animals as long as we have a strong desire, we enjoy the taste. That's wrong. And we say that, and the only things that can be wrong are things that even try to be true or false. And if they don't try to be true or false, then what are we doing? So just understand that this is right off the bat a way for a moral skeptic to push back. Now, some of these people are also, they'll call them moral nihilists. And there are people who will say, I'm a moral nihilist because nothing is wrong, in the sense that it's nothing, I can never, it's not the case that it's wrong to steal, you understand, because we're not expressing beliefs. So, and there's a sense in which all non-cognitivists are nihilists, just because literally it is not the case that we have any obligations to do anything.
Yeah, okay.
So, because they're not true or false. So it is not the case. It's just the same for Like it's false that some of these things are true. So I know that's a weird way to.
No, I hear you.
Okay, so that's one argument for a moral skeptic is morality seems kind of like a speech act, doesn't really seem like the sort of thing that can be true or false. So that's one of them. There's something else, which is the problem of disagreement. So some people say the fact that there's really no way to solve a moral dispute is evidence that we're not tracking any features of the world or psychology. It's basically like two people saying, I like vanilla and you like chocolate. And there's no way to cross that gap. And since there's no way to cross that gap, this is fundamentally not explicable or explainable in terms of like reason or evidence. That's just a flawed enterprise. So that's called the problem of disagreement.
Well, yeah, because there's no sense morality isn't some like, property that exists outside of subjective, minds. It's like there's a level where you can always say there's not some like objective right answer here. But again, you can always say that they are wrong with respect to a particular goal. So if the goal is to maximize well-being, you can say that they're objectively wrong with respect to that goal and explain why.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so some people would actually call that. So Parfit, for example, was one of these non-natural, irreducible, moral realist type guys, okay? Now, I've been saying that you're a type of realist because you think that at least some moral propositions or beliefs come out as true or false. And
to be clear, I say any moral statement is true conditional.
Sure, yeah, but that's enough to make you not a non-cognitivist. For non-cognitivists, they don't come out as true or false on any condition whatsoever. Zero. There's no way to make one of them true or false, right? So, but somebody like Parfit is going to say that you are a moral nihilist. And the reason that he would say that is because as long as your desires change, literally anything can become an obligation for you.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
Now I'm willing to bite that bullet.
I am too. Mm-hmm.
But for some people, that's a form of nihilism. I
would agree. Do you not agree with that?
Well, I guess I don't really care what it's called, right? As long as the facts are correct, they can call it whatever they want. They can call it divine command ethics for all I care, as long as the underlying like psychological architecture is good. You can call it nihilism. I don't really care. But on our view, I take it that both of us think that given somebody's goals or desires, there are some things that they ought to do and some things that they shouldn't.
Of course.
And that makes us a type of realist, I think, because it is true that me, as somebody who desires to lessen animal suffering, it is true that I ought not to go to McDonald's and buy a double cheeseburger. That's true for me, given my
goal. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there you go. So it's very weird for me to think of a moral nihilist as somebody of whom it is true that they ought not to buy a cheeseburger.
Okay.
That's a very weird way to think of a nihilist.
So I don't know why that wording just fucked my head. You find it weird to think of a moral nihilist as someone who would just have an opinion on whether it's right or wrong to buy a cheeseburger?
It's weird. It's weird for
You can repeat it word for word. It just didn't
I don't remember how I did it.
Okay.
So it's weird to me to call somebody a nihilist who thinks that they ought not to go buy a cheeseburger.
I agree. that's why I split it into descriptive and prescriptive nihilism,
Yeah.
because then we can all say we all agree descriptively we're nihilists. There's not some fucking spooky moral matter out there. We can all get on that page. But who's actually going to say that you don't have any kind of, preference here for what you should do?
Yeah, like it seems. So when I think of a nihilist, I think of like maybe these crazy anarchist punks from like the 80s who are going to punk shows and lighting each other on fire. I think of like crazy people or something like that. And I'm just like, I don't even know if it makes sense to talk. I don't really know if there could even be a moral nihilist. You know what I mean? Like somebody who has no desires, maybe? I don't know. But anyway, so I take it that I'm a kind of non-nihilist. And if somebody wants to call me a nihilist, that's fine. I don't really care.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even give much of a shit about the wording. Like, I'm a nihilist with respect to what is the nature of morality. I'm not a nihilist with respect to how should we structure reality, or how should we structure our world.
And here's what it comes down to first. Let's talk about animals for a second, because I think this is what you'll be discussing with Jeff. At the end of the day, I don't think it's either rational or irrational to have the desire to lessen suffering. If there's somebody who doesn't have a desire to reduce suffering, I just wouldn't know what to say to them. It just seems like their brain is broken. Or I think they're lying, you know what I mean? But anyway, it just seems like all things being equal, we pick between two worlds, one in which there's a vast amount of animal suffering, and another world in which I'm just as happy and there's less animal suffering. And what kind of psychopath would choose the first world over the second one? And so if they say, I choose the second world, obviously, where there's much less animal suffering, okay, good. So you and I both agree, whether or not we think that it's some like objective factor with the universe, you and I both would rather be in a world in which there's less animal suffering.
Yeah, of course, we absolutely would.
And so the question is, what is it then that justifies it for you? Is it literally just the taste of meat? Because that seems like we wouldn't justify anything else on those grounds or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have fucking debate. Can you just repeat that last words there?
Yeah, so it just seems like once we agree on that point, then they're going to have to bite the bullet and say, the reason that I eat meat is because it justifies me picking the world that's worse off for animals is merely my taste preferences. And that to me seems just like a radical position to take, and one that we would find unacceptable all over the place.
Yep.
Right.
And that you can actually demonstrate to be just like totally incoherent and I mean, taste preference, though, you don't accept that as an argument for anything else.
No. Well, and imagine another world in which, or not even world, just imagine our world, you're talking to somebody who's like, I get a little bit of enjoyment from strangling chickens with my bare hands. I think that it would be good to minimize animal suffering, all things considered, but I really enjoy the 10 seconds where I strangle a chicken with my bare hands. Yes. You know what I mean? I'm thinking to myself, wait, so 2.5 trillion animals die a year because you get a little bit of pleasure out of strangling an animal with your bare hands? Doesn't that seem like a radical position to take?
It seems like
you sound like your microphone switched and now you're back. It sounds like you're good now, though.
I'm cool just strangling this chicken because I get, some kind of pleasure out of watching it die or strangling it or, whatever.
Yeah, also known as like psychopathy or something like that, So, I mean, I think that there are other reasons. I mean, I think there are explanations why people eat meat, right? It's not just pure evil. it has to be something like, well, this is how I was raised. Everybody does it around me. It's very convenient. And I'm just not that familiar with this alternate lifestyle, etc. You know, there's some explanation there. It's not just I'm an evil person. Because even these people don't like watching videos of factory farms, right? If you show them a video of a cow getting its throat cut or being boiled alive, they're disgusted. So there's some explanation there. And a lot of times I think if you just boil it down, like, look, do you really think that your tastes justify this sort of behavior towards animals? I think that the obvious answer for anybody anywhere in the world is going to be yes. And I think that there are usually some other kinds of explanations of why they answer no.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who are actually evil. But
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, most people, it's some kind of like cognitive dissonance, indoctrination, mental weakness. It's like a combination of these kind of things.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, that was a super interesting thing. Is there more to be said on that? On just all the morality stuff? Anything about JF and his morality?
I mean, we could watch that video. I mean, I could go on for. I could grade his moral nihilism, like a freshman essay, and try to provide him some references. And look, I have other reasons why I don't like JF, which you might not share, but in particular, his discussion on. I watched a video of his about race-realism that kind of got my blood boiling a little bit. So, I
got your blood boiling.
Well, pseudoscientific justifications for putting a hard genetic division between, say, people in Africa and Europeans, for example.
When you read something like the bell curve, have you read that?
Yeah, I have.
You don't like that, eh?
No. And again, this is not because I'm an SJW. This is because the science doesn't say what they think it says. Now, the bell curve itself has been thoroughly debunked. I mean, that's just been overturned. There were so many issues with the bell curve. We can throw that out. There are contemporary people working, though, in the field who do put forward like much more reasonable, saner positions. But people like JF aren't expressing those reasonable positions.
What's insane about the bell curve?
Oh boy.
You had to sum it up and like bullet point the worst insanity.
So for one, he usually opts for simplistic explanations of very difficult to explain, very complex phenomena, like IQ. And IQ studies have been done since the time of the bell curve. And by the way, what's his name? Charles
Murray.
Charles Murray. I actually like the guy. I think he's very reasonable. And at the time, I actually think he was doing a pretty decent job with the data in front of him. My problem is not necessarily with him, and I don't necessarily ascribe evil intentions to him. But since the time that that book was written, there has been a mountain of data, in part, thankfully, inspired by Murray, that overturns most of the core claims of his book. Like, IQ is a specific trait. IQ is environmentally invisible. All these sorts of things that are
whoa. Environmentally invisible?
Correct.
What the hell does that mean?
Meaning the impact of the environment on the so-called trait of intelligence is negligible at best. And
I don't know how I feel about that, but I mean there is definitely you don't deny that IQ is largely genetic, do you?
Well, do you mean IQ scores are genetic, or do you mean in something called intelligence?
Well, I mean, I think it's true for intelligence also, but like an IQ scores is how they measure it.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's not even that controversial anymore. If
No,
you
that what?
if you level
Sorry,
if you
I didn't understand. You're saying that you think that IQ scores are not genetic? There's not a
largely the differences in IQ scores are chalked up to things like nutrition or something like that,
Whoa.
rather
Okay.
than genetic.
Wait, are you talking between? I'm not talking about between races right now. I'm just talking about just someone's IQ score.
I'm
'Cause-
talking. Yes, exactly.
Okay, that seems very weird to me. I mean, like when you have the APA commissioning a big panel of people, you're probably aware of this if you looked into it, of a multitude of views, to just get a paper on the facts about IQ. They commissioned one of these big fucking fact-finding missions. So you had people of all political persuasions in there, and they came to a unilateral consensus, like a total consensus on the information they presented, and they put heritability at, I think it was like 0.44 to 0.7 something. It was a range.
0.6. Yeah.
What they no they gave a range when I last checked. It was a range. I think it was like 0.44 0.7 something.
Regardless, yeah, you could be right.
I think that's actually the exact. It's something like 44% to 77%.
So you don't deny that, do you?
Well, again, I have very large misgivings about what it is they're tracking. IQ scores might have a high genetic, not even that high. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's that high until it's over, say, 0.7 or 0.65. I think that's kind of the acceptable limit for saying there's a strong genetic component. And if it's under that, right, then largely the explanation is going to be explicable in terms of something else. But let's say so. For one, intelligence isn't a single trait, but let's just say it is because what we're trying to explain is IQ.
Well, and wait 1 second. It's not a single trait, but whenever you try to create any kind of psychometric, measure to measure any specific type of intelligence, it correlates back to G.
Yeah, well, yeah, we can talk about that, but
okay. All right.
Yeah, but in any case, there are a couple of factors that, when you control for them, flatten out your IQ scores, regardless of where you were born or who your parents were.
Okay, what are those?
The biggest one, the most important one, is nutrition and the amount of money that your parents make. And not because your kids are eating money, right? But because that's a good indicator of the sort of environment that you were raised in, including access to prenatal vitamins, including access to appropriate foods, protein-rich, zinc, another one, very important.
Okay, this is just cutting against my basic intuitions. Now, I don't mean this in a rude way. I don't think you'll take it in a rude way, but I'm starting to wonder if you have a bit of a motivation here, in all honesty. Do you?
Oh, that's fine. I mean, look, yeah. I mean, I'm like very anti-racist, right?
I'm noticing that, and I am too. I don't support a single race-based policy, but
right.
I find that, I mean, it's just blatantly obvious that people have different intelligence levels. Like, you don't think that's the case?
Oh, absolutely. I think that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not disputing that intelligence doesn't vary. I think it even varies racially. The question is, what explains that? Yeah,
but you're saying, I mean, look, man, there's people who I've grown up with who have had very, very similar quality of life. Same kind of, parents earning, same kind of home environment, just people who have grown up alongside with. And I've been able to tell from a young age they have different intelligence levels. And it's not like, I don't think it's just the, one's eating a bit healthier. It's like there's people who obviously have more innate ability than others. You doubt that?
No, I definitely think that. The question isn't whether or not, let's say that there's some, let's say it's random, right? It could even be pretty high random variation, because it might not be, even if it is genetically heritable, there could be all of these different factors that are totally random. Now, the question is does IQ vary for genetic reasons along racial lines? And I just don't believe that it does.
I would think that it, to some degree, does. It would be marvelous if the evolution stopped at the neck, right? It's like there's going to be cognitive differences, and it would be amazing if intelligence wasn't affected by, people evolving in different climates. I'll totally give you that gap could be. It's fully possible that it's largely collapsible by equalizing the environment, but I would be amazed if there is no level of genetic difference between populations that evolved separately in terms of IQ.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that being there a little bit. What I'm very skeptical of, and again, if the science shows me wrong, then I'm wrong. So this isn't a I'm going to believe it at all costs sort of thing. But the question is why would something? I mean, so there's a lot of questions here, but one is, how in the world did our brains diverge so quickly, genetically speaking, in such a relatively short amount of time? And so that's one thing. That's like one just general scientific problem that I have.
I don't think there has to be a claim that it's radical, but go ahead though.
And two, why is it that when children are adopted and brought over from these countries, why do we see such a giant change in IQ? So most children that are adopted from Africa, depending on what age they're adopted, their IQ, they're all of a sudden the smartest person in their village, and it's not even close. To me, the two best indicators of intelligence and what it'll be is your parents' wealth, and your nutrition. And those are things that we can test for, and we have tested for. And if you Google like the impact of health on intelligence or something like that, you'll find that people now think that this is either the most important factor or it's very close to the most important factor. I'm okay with there being, by the way, a genetic component. I'm incredibly skeptical with it being some kind of major indicator.
Okay, yeah, I have never. I mean, if you can go back and watch, what are my videos like? Oh, there's one where I'm defending this sort of like white nationalist guy. It's like what was the context? Because basically, I don't defend white nationalism itself, but he was being basically, long story short, there's a guy who was trying to, guilt by associate me with. Do you know the McCarthys?
No.
They're alt-right, sort of like white nationalist vegan YouTubers. A very, very fringe community right there. But I mean, if you talk to them, I would say more so Corey. He's a very sweet guy. He's a very nice guy. I don't think he has any ill will. So even if we're going to reach the conclusion that his positions are evil, he's not, it's not, I don't think he's driven by evil. But, there was someone accusing him of wanting to commit genocide and all this stuff. And this was all in an effort to, guilt by associate me for just like, I'll talk to anyone. I'll talk to SJWs. I'll talk to them. But the effort there was to basically suggest that I am some kind of delusional, like either racist or racist apologist or something like this. So what was I about to say? Oh yeah, but you can go back to even those videos, and I'm still making statements like, I don't know what percentage of variance in how people behave or their IQ or whatever it is comes down to genetics or environment. I don't have the data to give an answer to that. My default assumption with anything when I'm told about a trait and we don't know if it's environmental or genetic is 50-50, and then I let the data just push me in whatever direction it pushes me. So I'm not committed to any kind of position like, oh, it has to be largely environmental or it has to be largely genetic. I'm totally open to whatever it is that the data might say there.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, I don't think there's anything inherently racist about somebody thinking that there are genetic differences in IQ in the races, right? There's nothing inherently racist about that, right? So I don't want to make it sound like I am, but a lot of the people who I interact with, and this is where part of the animosity and maybe my hidden agenda comes from, is they actually power policies and are inspired to come up with policies based on these sorts of things, which makes me extra vigilant in something that I think is otherwise true anyway.
I have to say, I find it funny that you openly refer to your hidden agenda. But I hear what you're saying, though. I think you're a bit more sensitive to it than me. But I follow the data, and it seems like there's a genetic component. I mean, it would be frankly marvelous if there isn't. How big it is not something that I have I haven't done the research to actually know the answer to that. I mean, when I see the APA saying IQ is heritable, they put it 0.44 to 0.75. A bigger portion of that is on the over 50%, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like I lean towards it could be that the genetic part is bigger, just purely based on that piece of data from the APA. I'm totally willing to take that back if it changes. Sure. But yeah, I have no.
It's a large range, and look. We all, and let me just try to inspire skepticism. I'm not talking about skepticism with regards to a particular view. I mean all of them. Anybody who tells you this is how this works. I, for a very long time, worked in a center of neurodynamics. I studied cog-sci. Mm-hmm. I worked in a lab of synesthesia. I studied brains. We simply do not know how this stuff works yet. We just categorically don't. And I'm talking about fundamental questions, it is still a live question whether or not the brain is a type of computer. And by that, I don't mean a desktop computer. I mean performs computations, right? Okay. The most fundamental questions about how brains work are at this point totally unanswered. So when somebody says intelligence, this, that, genetically heritable, maybe you're just generalizing to some biological conclusion from from like surveys or IQ scores, and there are a lot of really confusing things going on. I'm not trying to just say, oh, we can all believe whatever we want because this is confusing. I'm saying we are at the earliest possible stages of this, and I'm just incredibly skeptical that we know much of what's going on. I don't even know what is meant by intelligence that much outside of what somebody scores on an IQ test.
Yes. Okay. I think that, IQ test does seem to measure our general ability to kind of reason, and it's predictive of life outcomes and all this kind of stuff.
Well, a certain kind of reasoning, but it actually doesn't do a very good job of measuring the other sorts of reasoning, like the embodied cognition, embodied reasoning, those sorts of things that people who are highly physical in a very simplistic environment spend all of their brain resources mastering. And this is kind of a technical point, but things like your sense of balance, things like knowing where your hands are and how fast you can move them, because the sorts of tasks that they're mastering are things like climbing trees very fast from a very young age. And so these are the parts of their brain, their plastic brains, that get emphasized. So there are a lot of things that are very difficult for us to understand how they're going. And that is a type of intelligence in that it requires deeply mathematical tasks that you have to do quickly. Climbing up a tree very quickly is essentially a mathematical problem. And people in Africa do that much better than we do because they use it from a very young age, and so develops very mature, that it matures at a very young age, and that is not tested for at all on an IQ test. And what I'm suggesting is that if my view of the brain is correct, and that it's a general purpose machine that's very plastic and changes to the environment it finds itself in, then maybe the differences in IQ tests, which don't test general intelligence, they test something else like analytical abstract reasoning, but not like embodied cognition, there might be other explanations.
I hear that. I can't help but think that you're kind of trying to construct other categories of intelligence to give value to, people or maybe groups who don't perform as well as what we typically consider at what we typically consider, tasks that require intelligence or IQ scores. So, I mean, I don't know. Like, it's weird because I don't think you're a dishonest dude. I just think that I'm just being honest. I find it hard to believe that there isn't a kind of like, well, you even acknowledge there's a level of motivation to what you're saying. Because it just seems to me like you can try to sort of paint like, your physical ability as like a form of intelligence. I don't know if I'm necessarily against that, but that doesn't mean that there isn't the thing that we're already measuring as intelligence. And that's kind of like,
well, do you think we test for those kinds of embodied intelligent tasks on
no,
IQ tests?
No, not on an IQ test. No, we don't.
Sure. So might one explanation, just forget for a moment some things that you already think. Let's just say that the view of the brain, that it is a plastic, I'm not going to say blank slate because I think you don't like that, but just think of it as a general processing machine that's eager and ready to find out what kind of its environment in so that it can master the sorts of tasks that it expects it's going to use for the rest of its life. Now, imagine that somebody hands you a paper test in your language. You've never gone to school. You've never taken a class, but you understand the language. But for the first time, you're filling out holes on one of these tests. And then it gets to the end of it, and it turns out that you do way worse than a 12-year-old in America who's been doing this twice a week his entire life. Now, I understand how this might sound to you.
Yes,
but
it's not comparing but yeah.
But this is the sort of thing, the sort of story, at least at the outset, that could be true. And to me, simply pointing out that people in this geographic region score like an 80, and people in the United States do get like 102, and people in Japan get 108. That doesn't mean, I mean, that radically underdetermines the genetically heritable thesis. I'm not saying that it's not any part of the story. I'm just really skeptical that that explains most of it.
Okay, well, I don't know if it explains most of it, and I'm not the one to get deep on the data with. Like, I'm at the border of my knowledge here. My overall position, hearing you talk about IQ, is what you're saying, like, I don't know. Okay, let me just think for a second. I think that IQ measures something real, and I think what it measures does have to do with our general reasoning ability. It could be that you could talk about other things, like, your physical ability, and it could be that it doesn't correlate with G. Maybe that's possible. I don't know if there's data on that. I think that it's really like I have a hard time saying this kind of stuff because I don't want to sound like I'm saying that you aren't being rational. But I feel like there might be a bit of a level of wanting to downplay the kind of significance of IQ. But that's just an emotional perception that I could very well
here, I put it this way.
It's not an argument.
I do have other background reasons for rejecting the sort of conclusion that, frankly, people a lot of times on like the alt-right or race realist side have put forward.
Yeah,
but these aren't just emotional reasons or political reasons.
no.
This is because a lot of the time I just reject the way they think of the brain.
Mm.
I don't accept massive modularity. I think that there are good empirical reasons to accept the general information processing view. And so it just flat out, I do have a lot of background reasons to be skeptical of some of these claims, but these aren't like, oh, I feel so bad for black people. It's like, I don't think you understand the brain correctly.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
Well, I hear what you're saying. So yeah, when it comes to IQ, it's like that's just the thing I'm throwing in. I could be totally wrong. I just think there might be a level of motivation there. I don't mean it in a bad way, but I don't know that anything you're saying is wrong. At least I don't have the data to prove it wrong. I think that I believe IQ is real. I believe it measures something real. I believe that it probably varies by race, at least to some level genetically, and I don't think you even resisted that it's probably true to at least some level. I'm not sure about what percentage of IQ is genetic. My current belief is that it's probably at least it seems like if the APA commissions a big panel of people and they have multiple views and they all disagree with each other and they all go and do the research and they unilaterally come to a decision that the heritability is between 0.44 and 0.75, and the bigger part of the variance is on the over 50% side, that it could be largely genetic. But that doesn't say anything necessarily about group to group. That's more like on the individual level.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's real. I think it measures something. I think it's certainly partially genetic. It's possible it's largely genetic, and that's about the extent of my position there.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, we can talk about that sometime. I have kind of a lot of things that I could say about it, and a lot of them I don't want to deep dive that much because
I'm not actually the one to deep dive with on that, to be totally honest.
I'm the man of many links. I can post some data to support your claim.
Wait, one second, because Will, you talk about this a lot. I thought you were a pretty big believer in IQ.
Yeah, I am, and well, I can show you. But I've also said I've had like a little bit of pushback because there's there's two mistakes people make, and I'll just show you like right here is the cultural load on IQ tests. So like things like coding, digit span, these things, very little to no object vocabulary, highest cultural load. But if we look at all the IQ tests, the traits which predict IQ the most are the ones that have the higher cultural load, and the higher the cultural load, the better the prediction in terms of heritability. And there is some, but like IQ is a real phenomena. But if we just look at all humans and just take humans in the wild and just like we would have like feral humans, we just throw them from birth like animals. They would look like effectively animals. A lot of it, because like everything will come down to genetics at some point. It's a bit more complex. What he's referring to is stuff that I think there's evidence to suggest it. Yeah,
okay. Well, I think IQ. I think you guys should go at IQ sometime, because I guess I think we're feeling like winding down off the IQ and probably off talking in general. I'm running out of energy, but you guys should really go at it. I want to ask JHC. I could persuade JF to debate you. Would you want to do that? Would that appeal to you?
On which topic?
Well, pretty much any of these things you disagree with him on. He's kind of one of those, I'll debate anyone who disagrees with me if, they have a platform, or if they're vouched for by someone who's, respected by me. Like,
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if I could get him to debate you.
I'd love to debate him. The only issue that I have as of now, in which I've been dragging my feet, is reasons why I am kind of trying to remain anonymous. And the more I show up, the less likely it is I remain anonymous. If that makes sense.
Okay, well, I'm just curious because I'm sure I'll be talking to him soon, so I'm going to be debating him. Is that a you don't know if you want me to try to see if I can make that happen?
Yeah. I need to think about it.
Okay, well, get back to me on that if you want to. Well, yeah, I mean, that was a whole shitload of fucking awesome stuff. I really liked going through all that, all those different moral positions. It's super interesting to explore.
Yeah, we can deep dive on any of that stuff whenever we want. And I know there's other people in here who are kind of listening, so if they want to chat about it.
I just had a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
When we were talking about like things that are not, like they can't be reduced any further. I'm kind of curious where you fall on like emergence, and there's like concepts of strong emergence and weak emergence, and because like if you were to look at the properties of even things stuff simple as water, you look at how water has different properties than either hydrogen or oxygen, and the greater the quantity of water, it also affects the properties. So one H2O molecule interacts very differently depending on what state it is, how much pressure there is, and if you have oceans interact differently. I mean, there's like a whole water theory, and then there's also like like you have elementary particles, atoms. You were talking about that earlier. Then molecules, cells, but that eventually gets to like if there's this concept right here where you get like emergent properties. The further you go up. That are different. I mean, molecules work differently. They have different properties, and in some sense, they can eventually all be reduced to the most fundamental properties of the universe, whatever those properties are, and to the extent that they're plural or not, or otherwise. But could this not also be the case with things like morality and emergence is also a term that's used in philosophy. So I'm wondering what you were talking about earlier, because I did kind of catch up a little bit later in the conversation, I think. Did you touch on that at all, or?
Yeah, so, I mean, for just a moment, I think we did, and both of us, I think, kind of came out on the side of maybe like anti-emergence a little bit, like, and I don't
weak or strong.
So I think I generally, I mean, I'm not really wedded to the position, but I'm pretty friendly to the idea that that probably everything that we see is explicable in terms of the theoretically completed physical sciences.
Yeah, same.
Like I'm pretty happy with that. A lot of times emergent phenomena, I take it.
God of the gaps.
Yeah, I think that there's usually some kind of explanation there that's very friendly to neuroscience, chemistry, physics.
If you had a good enough understanding, like a transdisciplinary enough understanding, and at multiple different levels of analysis, like if you could probably make the connections and figure out if you just had like the most fundamental properties of the universe, you could probably figure out how things like genetics function, for instance.
Yeah. So I think that there's I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's this guy named Wilfrid Sellers, very, very original American philosopher, and he talks about the difference between the scientific image and the manifest image. And not to get all like kooky, but I like to think that we live as humans, we live in a world a little bit of make-believe. we live in a world of mid-sized objects.
Mhm.
We live in a world where our desk isn't almost all empty space. It's a solid object, right?
Yeah.
And I take it that there's a lot of things that happen all the way up where we are, of living things that aren't, and I'm doing air quotes, really real. And so there are phenomena that exist up here that I don't expect to ever be reducible. Not really. But that's almost because I think they don't really exist.
Yeah, or like how we think of them is, you know, kind of like a oversimplification, pattern seeking kind of way, rather than like how they actually are if we were to understand them. But so you're like, because like obviously systems, and like as you go up, because like what you're talking about is kind of like different levels of abstraction. When you're and we're at a level of abstraction where, you know, things like the size of galaxies can kind of get confusing, and when we look at, you know, quarks or whatever, things are very just fundamentally different from how we interpret things at this kind of, like you say, medium level. But so obviously you're against strong emergence, which is kind of kooky, yeah. But like weak emergence is more of a, like, we can talk about how systems can have properties of their own. Like we can make a program on a computer, and, you know, it can have that system can have its own like properties of some sorts, but they can ultimately be explained by more baser phenomena. Same with humans, and, you know, anything at like higher levels of abstraction. So, because like a weak emergence doesn't really, like, it's, you know, it's I think it's like metaphysically benign is how they describe it or whatever. It's not the kind that, you know, philosophy would have to take issue with, or scientists.
I think the idea with weak emergence is that there are higher level properties are not logically entailed, but they're otherwise entailed by lower level properties, and thus there's not like an explanatory gap between them. Yeah.
But sometimes it's just like it's easier to understand it, you know, something like human behavior by looking at human behavior rather than looking at quarks. Just it's like a categorization that we make that's useful, but it really is just going down to the most baser levels, yeah. And, you know, eventually you would get to maybe irreducible fundamentals, and you would do this with logic too, in some sense. Like it is the way it is, and it can't, like, you know, like, why is logic? Why? Right.
Yeah, and I'll be fair, you know, I don't have like I don't really have like naturalistic explanations of all phenomena, and I don't know if they do. Like, like I'm pretty sure mathematics, or at least arithmetic, reduces to set theory, but I'm not sure if like set theory reduces to anything. I'm kind of skeptical about that. So, you know, does that mean I believe in the naturalistic world plus the immaterial world of sets? I don't really know what that means. I mean, I don't have explanations for everything.
Yeah.
And that was like Quine's position, and I take it that he's like the representative naturalist. So I'm still happy to call myself a naturalist if I believe the same things that Quine did. Quine believed in sets, so I can too. Yeah, I mean, like, mathematics makes things weird. It makes things kind of freaky. I don't really know what to do about that. But other than that, you know, like, I don't think that they're like, I think minds are brains. I think money's made up. You know, I don't think that they're like spirits, and I don't think that, and I think that eventually, the important one. I mean, this is one that people poke people like me in the eye with, is I think that consciousness is going to have a neuroscientific explanation at some point.
Oh yeah,
Whoa,
definitely.
wait a sec. I do too. I think that seems likely, although it's possible. It's fundamentally just we can't explain it. I'm agnostic there, actually. But with consciousness, you don't deny the hard problem, do you?
Well, what do you mean deny it? Like, do I deny
you'd acknowledge a
conclusion?
separation between soft problem. Can you mute, Will?
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. We all love your voice. We just don't like your fan. Yeah, so we like soft problems are like the correspondence problems. What brain activity corresponds to what states of consciousness, right? So like, depression is the brain doing this. Being happy is the brain doing that. Those are the soft problems, correspondence problems. And then the hard problem is the arising problem, which is how does consciousness arise?
Yeah, so I'm a materialist about the mind, meaning I think all mental states are brain states. Now, when it comes to the hard problem, which is, that it seems like there's some kind of separation between, there's some kind of explanatory gap. Just because I could know everything about how a bat's brain works, doesn't entail that I know what it's like to be a bat. And that's the hard problem.
Or how its consciousness arises. You can know the answer to every single soft problem, and you wouldn't have even grazed the hard problem.
So this is a super technical discussion. What I currently hold to is that the explananda, in this case, that first person subjective experience feeling, is actually an illusion.
No, you had me until there.
I was really, really hoping you wouldn't go there. I'd fight you hard. How are we experiencing it if it's an illusion? It clearly exists, but what is it then?
So look, there's all right, how to start. So I'm very skeptical of the introspective evidence, and I think the introspective evidence gives the sorts of results that are kind of conflicting. So in other words, here's what I think brains are, and here's what I think minds are. I take it that what we see in our head are representational states of objects in the world. Okay? So if I have a red ball, it comes from seeing a red ball. It comes from photons bouncing off of some object, striking the cones in my eye, and then drawing a map and filling in the color in some brain state. I don't think that that's necessarily a conscious state yet. I think that there are these other internal sensors that monitor the feeds from different sensory data streams and builds a coherent story of my environment.
Okay,
that's what I think.
But that didn't answer the hard problem on any level.
Well, I'm getting there.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a representationalist about what's known as qualia. What it's like. Well, what it's like. Yeah. What it's like to see a red ball, is literally just having a representation of a red ball. I don't think that there's anything else specific going on. And to be fair, even Chalmers is a representationalist, the zombie guy. I don't know if you know David Chalmers.
I'm loosely aware of him.
Yes, I mean, he invented the zombie problem. He invented what's called the hard problem of consciousness. And if you ask him, what is qualia? He's going to say, it is a representation, an internal representation of an external object.
Yep.
And then he's going to say, there's some extra thing, some non-physical immaterial property called qualia.
Yes.
That is like wrapped around this representation that makes it conscious.
That's hyper abstract. So, okay, so let's just drill down there. So where does qualia exist?
Well, it depends what you mean by qualia.
Where does subjective experience exist?
I think representations exist in the brain.
How can it be in the brain?
Well, if we're talking about a red ball, it gets into the brain by light striking the ball and activating cones in my eye.
Wait, but you know how you're actually seeing an image right now.
Yeah,
Yes.
my monitor.
That
Does my monitor have
image
qualia?
doesn't have a spatial location.
It's representing.
What? Well, wait. One sec. So that image, it doesn't have a spatial location. It's not located in the brain. It's generated by the brain.
Oh, I
But
think it is located in the brain.
How? There's. I mean, I don't. That doesn't sound like a coherent thought to me.
Well,
because
it's
if
a system.
because there's actually the physical image you're seeing right now with your eyes, right?
Yes.
So
Well,
that's what we'd call like your subjective perception.
correct.
Your subjective perception. That's a thing of its own. It's like that's not just matter.
Well, I would argue that it is just matter. I don't think that there's anything
Okay.
over and above the physical processes going on in my brain, which I think is a representational process. I have an internal representation of an external object. I don't think that there's anything more to what we call subjective experience of a thing other than having a representation of some object in our brain.
Man, I think that is
disagree.
wordsmithing your way around the problem there. So I'm not sure if that's intentional or if it's just not fully appreciating the nature of the problem.
That is the most lobbed objection that physicalists hear.
I would.
So you don't have to
really-
feel bad. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I've heard worse. I've heard worse from Chalmers.
Yeah. What, in person?
Yeah.
No. Well, there you go.
I took a class on consciousness with Chalmers.
Because the thing is, saying in the brain, that does not answer the question. There's an actual image that you're perceiving, and it's saying it's in the brain. Well, there's not a little screen in your brain, JHC.
So that's actually a kind of fallacy, the homuncular fallacy. And by the way, that shows up for everybody if you take that view. I think that it's a constitutive relationship, meaning there's not a little person watching a movie screen in my brain. It just is that representation. Now, not all representations are conscious, so there is some kind of other property that makes some representations, again, air quotes, conscious and other ones unconscious. Our best guess right now is it's something like working memory.
Okay.
Well, no,
sorry, you're really losing me here. There's your subjective reality. We're talking about when you sit there and meditate or something. It's like you can feel sensations of weight. You can see if you have your eyes open. You can hear. There's these sensory channels, and there's this base level of awareness, and that actually exists somewhere, right? It's happening somewhere, but it doesn't have a three-dimensional. That's not an answer. I really don't consider that an answer because if you want to say it's produced by your brain and it corresponds exactly to activity happening in your brain, I'm fine with that. But it's not. I mean, I won't. I don't agree that it's a fallacy to say that there's you're talking as if there's a screen in your brain, because just talking about vision, you're seeing an actual image. So I mean, where does that image exist? Saying in my brain, it's like I don't know how to be any more clear.
Well, where would it be?
I don't know, and that's why there's a hard problem.
I mean, JHC, this is what I hear when you saying. You're basically saying, well, I'll tell you what where qualia arises. I'll tell you. It's when you feed data into a brain. I mean, kind of seems like,
sure.
duh.
But
what are the properties of a brain rather than a computer, which makes one have qualia and not the other? And I would say
that's a good way to put it.
And I would say that the reason what would make one thing have qualia and not the other, and is what I was referring to earlier when it regards to emergence, and it's how systems and patterns and you have complex adaptive systems. You can have emergent properties, and I think one of those emergent properties would be qualia. So a brain is not just matter with data feeding into it that also has memory, and that's what makes it qualia. I think that it actually has to do with the nature of the system. And if you understood the nature of the system, then you would understand qualia. So
Well,
it's like
see, look, I'm gonna say, look, here's the biggest issue with any explanation that
Mhm.
people think that I just have, but you in fact have too with what you just said.
Okay.
Okay, what you just put forward is a functionalist view of the mind, which is when we understand how the system is working, aka its causal and functional relationships with each other, then we understand how there are qualia. But now all you're doing is you're giving me a list of this is what this thing does, check.
Ooh.
It has this causal relationship, check. How do I know? How does that solve the so-called
It
hard
doesn't.
problem of consciousness?
It totally doesn't. There's an assumption in what Will said, right? That getting the totality of data on how the brain is working would actually answer the hard problem. That is possible, or it's not possible. I don't fucking know. But
there still is the explanatory gap there. And let me
Well-
just extend the point and say,
okay.
unless you deflate the explananda, you're always going to be left with the hard problem of consciousness.
See, but that okay, wait, that's the problem right there, because you're trying to lower the threshold of what needs to be
Yes.
explained here. That's the problem.
Yes.
Well,
Yes,
no.
exactly. Oh, I agree with you.
I don't want that. That's JHD. That's avoiding the problem. That's not answering the problem.
I mean,
that's you answering soft problems and saying, I want look, I'm just gonna dead honest. The kind of people who try to say what you're saying right now are very smart people, and they're people who want to have a total and functional map of the world. They don't need to have black and white answers to every single question, but they need to have a kind of schema for how everything works. And I think that there is something psychologically driving you there, where you're saying,
well, look, that's fair.
I need to lower the threshold so that I can have a functional explanation. But that is dodging the question. It's the same thing as it's like you'd call it like a bait and switch. Again, no malice intended there, but like with free will, when someone explains free will in terms of like, they start talking about, rational versus irrational or voluntary, involuntary choices. It's like, no, that's changing what we're talking about. That's lowering the explanatory burden so that you can say you've answered the question.
Yeah, look, I agree with you on almost all of that, except for just 2 points.
Okay.
Okay. One, I actually think that the idea of deflating the explananda is a legitimate enterprise and has borne itself out multiple times throughout the history of scientific endeavors, including, I'll just bring up one.
Yeah, give me an example.
That I was just thinking of. People tried to explain the flow of time, okay? And this was a huge problem, and we don't ever talk about it anymore. Nobody talks about the flow of time. How do you explain the flow of time? But throughout the time, up from Newton until maybe the last person to really talk about it was this guy named McTaggart, or Bertrand Russell's teacher when he was in college. And what happened was they came up with this explanation of the flow of time, which just got rid of the term flow altogether. Now, there were people at that time who were like, well, you haven't really explained what I wanted to know. It's like, I know it seems like I haven't, but look, we came up with this really awesome theory of time, and here's all of this empirical evidence and mathematical evidence, and look, the explananda just kind of fizzled out and disappeared, and now we think we understand time. Now, you might say, there is nothing you could do.
Okay, sorry, I have to butt in. I know you're not done this point. Objection to make after, so not trying to be rude. This example just isn't working for me because the flow of time is some weird abstract concept that maybe it's just my lack of knowledge, but I'm having a hard time understanding if that's even a valid question to begin with. Is there another example to use?
Sure. So we can talk about vitalism. Are you familiar with vitalism?
I've heard the term. Remind me what it means.
So vitalism is the idea that there's some extra explananda that explains agency other than, say, physics and chemistry. So all living things had this extra property.
See, that also, these things seem to me like wrong wrong concepts that don't actually refer to something tangible and graspable.
Well, I think that's a product.
Yeah.
I think that's just a
Of
product
growing up, I
of
agree.
modern. Yeah, I mean, if you Google vitalism, you're going to see that there were a lot of people who believed in this theory throughout all of history, up until very recently, like 120 years ago. People were vitalists, and it was that there was some major difference between living things and non-living things over and above, say, chemistry and physics.
Yeah, but that's just, you can so easily explain why that's not true. It's all just matter, and some matter has managed to organize itself into a pattern that it's doing something different. So
exactly,
I will
but you're a contemporary.
Sorry, I'll let you make your second point and finish this point and everything, but I don't accept analogizing that, and I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm willing to accept another example, but you're talking about a concept there that actually does not make sense. And I know you're going to say that it's the same thing with the hard problem, and that it's just a product of when I've been raised that I think it's a problem. But my personal subjective perception of my reality leads me to think that that is wrong. So I'm not accepting the analogy, but you can continue.
Well, the point is not to say that I'm trying to convince you to give up on your subjective experience per se. The point is that you can phrase questions in such a way that seem really difficult at a time, but just fizzle out and kind of disappear when we adopt a new scientific paradigm. Because on the face of it, vitalism seems extraordinarily sensical. It actually seems something like universally held until you kind of enter like a scientific age, scientific society, which is that there just is a fundamental difference between a rock and an animal.
Okay.
I'm
sorry, but just the difference though, JHC, is that with vitalism, the conclusion that blows it out of the water, that you have, if vitalism is just the notion that there's a fundamental distinction between living and non-living matter, the thing that blows that out of the water is, okay, well, everything is all matter. Some matter is just doing different things than others because of evolution. So, I mean, that explanation actually
but why would you
an answer to the question, right?
Why would you adopt evolutionary theory though before, say, 1850?
No, I understand. No, wait. I'm not saying that there isn't a potential future paradigm that will somehow explain this. I'm saying the one that you're proposing right now, where you're trying to explain the hard problem by pointing to soft problems, does not do that.
Right.
And I also say that there's an analogy.
Wait, sorry. I'm sorry. I've been rude and cut in. We should let him finish this point and make his other objection, and then you can go, Will.
Right. So fundamentally, I'm open to rephrasings that were simply wrong about what needs explaining. Happens all the time. Now, the question is could we ever be wrong about what we call subjective experience? And that's the big one, right? Mm-hmm. And for a long time, I thought the answer was no. There's no way. Like, you can convince me of anything, but the one thing that I'm sure about is my own mental life. Now, there are actually, though, a lot of data emerging that we're actually really bad about reporting what's going on, even in our own head. And I don't mean things like, am I happy or am I not happy? I'm talking about things like, do you dream in black and white or in color? Do I dream in flat, like I'm watching a theater screener, or not? Mm-hmm. And what's funny is it's really easy to prime people to answer one way or another, and there are other things that are nearly inexplicable. Up until the 1940s, 1950s, the majority of people reported that they dreamed in black and white. Since the 1950s, that answer has actually changed, and now the overwhelming majority of people claim that they dream in color. And when they're scoring their certainty on this topic, everybody scores it very high. And even people who previously said black and white, it's very easy to prime them to change their answer. That's one thing. A second example, people are really, really bad and give divergent answers about the thing they're supposed to be most familiar with, which is their own internal running dialogue. I assume everybody has it. I have it. It's that voice when I'm not actually speaking that plays inside of my head. Sometimes it's playing music. Sometimes it's talking. Sometimes I'm hosting conversations between multiple people in order to plan out like responses.
Mm-hmm.
But what's weird is that people are terrible at explaining basic facts about it.
Mm-hmm.
What does it sound like? Well, if you ask somebody, does it sound like you sound like in your head? They'll tend to answer yes.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask them a question and you prime them to say, does your inner voice have no sound at all and actually is closer to like feeling your way through a sentence, like a soundless sentence, they'll say yes. So, and I could multiply these examples by a lot. There are some things that I'm kind of sure about, which is there are things like red apples that show up, and I'm fairly certain behind my eyes and above my chin. That seems to be true. But other than that, I actually have a really hard time focusing and giving good responses to what's going on in there. So I'm incredibly open to a neuroscientist telling me there's a kind of illusion happening here. I'm very open to that. I'm much less certain that things are as I think they appear to me.
Okay, so I hear your 2 points. The first is that... Oh, sorry, Will wanted to... Go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say with the whole vitalism thing, I mean, in some sense, you could say that it would work the opposite way, and that you were referring to it, and that if we really want to, we can steelman vitalism and saying that what they were describing was emergent properties at, this level of analysis, the difference between inorganic and organic matter, and the kind of the inherent properties were the properties that start beginning emergent at with when you organize systems within in a specific kind of way. You take these molecules and you kind of make it so that they can self-replicate. Well, there really is a very real fundamental difference there, and really based off of what they were understanding, that was a pretty good, reasonable way of thinking about it. But ultimately, it will get explained downwards, so it'll just be chemistry and physics. But they're really being concerned about a very relevant categorization, which is a very useful abstraction. It's so in terms of emergent properties with complex adaptive systems, I would say that there's a good way you could steelman that, and that they were just kind of confused with some of the claims that they were making and attaching to it. So,
sure.
And I would say that this is the same with qualia and consciousness to some extent. So,
yeah, I mean, and so there are other ways. A couple things. I'm fine with ways of steelmanning these positions. I'm just pointing out that as it happens, they didn't turn out that way, right? Like the vitalists always said, there was a fundamental difference at a fundamental level. They had what they called a vital spark, right? This isn't like some now there may be ways in which you could steelman them, but as it happens, what happened is we were like, oh, that's how chemistry works. Oh, that's how biology works. Yeah, we don't really need this. We don't really need to explain a fundamental distinction anymore. As it just turns out,
Well,
The
no, I would say that there kind of is a fundamental difference because you really can't go any more basic without losing those properties because all of these little molecules or like these atoms that you're looking at it when they're or when they're not structured in a very specific ways, they really do lose all of these really fundamentally different properties which are of real concern. So, insofar as you're concerned about these properties, that I mean, you could just be saying that they're concerned about, like, well, these systems are fundamentally different from these systems. So these patterns of organization are fundamentally different in terms of properties than these kind, and they would be right in some sense.
oh, I mean, bacteria are totally explicable, right, in terms of biology and chemistry and physics. So
Yep.
then they're not fundamentally different because the fundamental level, everybody agrees, is the same. The difference is the vitalist says our fundamental base is too small if it's just biology, physics, and chemistry. There's this separate non-physical category of vital forces down here with their own sets of laws. And that's where the difference is, because what you're suggesting is that there can be higher level emergent differences, and
Yeah.
I even agree with that, but that's not what the vitalists are doing. They're saying,
Well,
no, it's not. The difference isn't up here. It's all the way at the bottom. We were wrong.
but in the way what I see you though is you are effectively doing the opposite thing that they're doing. Is they are getting confused, and like I could just semantically redefine them and say, well, what they're really concerned about is patterns of organization and complex adaptive systems versus just inorganic matter, put in any other organization, and then there'd be a binary difference between the two. You could split them in two camps, and they have, like radically different, all the different ways that you can organize, matter within this universe, in which, result in these properties. So you can do these specific patterns, and then every other possible combination of matter, which just leaves it inorganic and it's just lumps of lead and carbon and hydrogen and iron, and it's all of a sudden we see bacteria happening, we see humans, we see trees, we see moss, and then over here we still have clay. There is something, kind of like fundamentally different, and that's kind of what they're getting at. And all I'm doing is kind of semantically redefining it. And the way that I see you doing it with qualia is essentially that you're kind of redefining, or you're kind of like semantically playing with qualia, that in a way is kind of ignoring that distinction between systems. And that's also how I see you just refer to the brain. Well, what the brain is the system. And that's what I'm referring to when we're obviously we're not talking about magic or some sort of like spiritual consciousness from netherworld. We're talking about a complex adaptive system or some sort of pattern of organization in which results in the states that we're experiencing, however those are organized. We're not even specifying. So we're just talking about the structure of the brain, or all possible subsets of structures which would also result in similar, like, subjective experiences. Or what we would call qualia.
And but so far all we're saying, it sounds like, and I'll agree with your earlier point on vitalism, just keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
For replacing what I'm saying with a kind of functionalism, I'm actually okay with. Like, I don't think if you replaced one of my neurons with some kind of silicon functional replacement, that all the lights are going to blink off inside my head, and I'll now be a philosophical zombie that acts the same but doesn't have conscious experiences. I'm okay with that. I don't see, though, that saying things are emergent or things are, consciousness and qualia happen in complex systems is going to be any more satisfactory, though, than my position, right? It still seems inexplicable on the view that consciousness happens. Well, because you're either saying it happens when things get complex enough,
Not
or
complex enough, because like a random string of numbers, just pure random. Like there's so many ways things that can be complex. It actually has to be specific patterns of organization, because not
Right.
just inherent complexity. Even if you were to take it to, you could have like an infinite string of numbers, and it might not, if that complexity doesn't actually result in whatever types of patterns that would be required to result in consciousness, then it's not complexity in and of itself. It has to actually be like some sort of system or pattern in which that would produce this. In the same way that like we can't just have complex ways that we structure atoms and expect to get Earth and everything that it entails at this very moment. No matter how complex you get, you might not ever get that. We're talking about a specific type of complexity.
well, what kind? Like functional complexity?
Not necessarily. There might be other ways of getting functional complexity which don't result in qualia. So it could it is just there are just systems in which produce the qualia that we have, and so whatever the nature of those systems are, and like fundamentally, how basic can you go? Or if we looked at all the hypothetical or theoretical systems which could produce qualia, just those systems, and not the other ones. So we could split it up in a binary like that. So between theoretical possibilities.
Let me put this another way. Why? I assume you don't think rocks are conscious, and
well,
I know this seems ridiculous, but how?
No.
Why
don't
you think it's? Yeah, and I don't think they are. I just want to know.
I doubt
why somebody like you thinks that they aren't conscious.
Just because of the way that they are structured, or the way that those atoms are organized, I don't think is a way that would result in consciousness.
Why?
Because there doesn't seem to be any evidence to suggest it. That's all.
So what kind of evidence, though, are we looking for? What's the key for knowing if something is conscious or not?
I mean, to a degree, we don't know. Like you were talking about insects earlier. I'm quite skeptical if they are. I'm not sure if those types of patterns would result in consciousness, and I don't know at what point in the evolutionary history did consciousness first arise at, and nor do I know what fundamental level, how many cells, or can you even have one cellular creature which results in consciousness? It doesn't seem very likely. And did it start at a common ancestor with the animal kingdom? Maybe like the eye, where we had I think it's somewhere between 50 to 100 different types of eye or eye-like ways that it had evolved independently. Maybe consciousness evolved independently multiple different times. But it seems, especially with creatures which have very similar patterns of organization with minds like ourselves, and have reactions like ourselves, and their brains have very similar properties and are organized much the same ways. And they have similar like neuron density with birds, but for the most part, it's just neuron amount and neuronal connections. So like really the only thing that's one of the basic or like one of the few things that are where there's a lot of variation. There's a hierarchy, obviously, but burbs, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's
yeah.
unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong. I'm playing.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything special to the biological.
Yeah, I'm playing
I don't
skeptic.
think it's special of meat. Yeah.
I'm playing skeptic a little bit because I think that the way the hard problems usually put forward to people like me generalizes to like close to. I think like the only person the hard problem of consciousness doesn't like apply to is a sort of wuss bag like Isaac who just says it's all a mystery and I don't really know, right? But anybody else who actually
what is that?
Oh, I thought you weren't listening.
Yes,
Sorry.
I'm listening. Yeah,
I was talking to somebody else. I was talking to Isaac's magical assassin.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
With Isaac for some time.
But I think that the hard problem shows up in such a way that it's going to apply to everybody's position. And I don't think that anybody can get out of it except for people who are like bullet biters like me, who are like, okay, since nothing in principle could answer the hard problem in the way that it is worded, let's open ourselves up to other avenues, and maybe we're actually wrong about what needs to be explained. Now, I'm perfectly aware that what I'm putting forward as a position, and it's a position of mine, in that it's like a current research interest. It isn't something like I'm totally convinced of, obviously, but it is to me a somewhat promising under explored avenue, which is deflationary. I understand that, and I'm always going to be open to people saying, great, you've done a really good job of explaining everything except how consciousness works. Great theory of consciousness. I understand that. I'm not like so stupid, but it is something that so like I'm self-aware, right? I know how this sounds to people. I've been thinking about this for like a long time. Consciousness is what got me interested in philosophy in the first place. And in fact, it was reading Chalmers' book, The Conscious Mind, in like high school, and I was like, holy shit, I do have a soul. But I'm, as I have kind of progressed and I've studied a lot of cog-sci stuff, it's now become my position that I would hold, even if I became like a Cartesian dualist, that humans are potentially much worse at introspection, and the data might not be as thick as we thought when it comes to introspective access.
Well, all of the stuff that you were saying about introspection and whatnot, like none of that, I think, really affects.
Oh yeah,
we're completely irrelevant to the whole qualia thing, as far as I'm concerned. Like
I agree. Let me put a few words in here. So like your two objections, if I remember them, the first was just you called it deflating the explananda. I'm a man of simple words. You're saying like lower the well, now I'm saying big words.
There's less that needs to be explained than we initially thought.
Yeah, lower the explanatory burden, deflate the explananda, whatever you want to say there. So that's the first point. And then the second one is, people are bad at describing their subjective states, so maybe the consciousness isn't even happening or something. So, I mean, you
have to be careful. You have to be careful. Let me just, when people say, are we conscious? The answer is obviously yes. When people say, so it gets really weaselly. It gets really difficult. A lot of times what people are saying is, because I think that we are conscious. There's something called access consciousness, which, as far as everybody but the behaviorists accept. The question is there something else, some special non-physical property, some first-person perspective which is irreducible and can't be explained in terms of say psychology or neuroscience?
No, I don't actually accept that. doesn't have to mean that there's some irreducible separation there. That may or may not be the case. The hard problem is just that we don't actually currently know how consciousness arises. So like when you talk about, I'll just hit two of your points there. When you say, deflate the explanatory burden, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and if we actually come up with a answer that does to the hard problem what a general understanding of like molecules and evolution and all of this did to vitalism, then I'll totally accept that. I'll say, okay, we've fucking solved it, and I'll be a happy person. But I don't accept that answering soft problems like correspondence problems. This is the brain state that corresponds to this. This is what your eyes do when they process light. I don't accept that does what an understanding of evolution does to vitalism, because it doesn't actually answer the question. With evolution, it actually literally explains why we now have this one type of matter can be living and the other kind can't. But again, just to be clear, if we do get something that does just collapse the gap there completely between how the brain is generating it and it actually existing, I will totally accept that. I'll be happy. And then with the people being bad at describing their subjective experiences, yeah, I mean, I agree with Will here. Like, let's say that people are fucking horrible and literally everything they're experiencing is an illusion. They're still experiencing an illusion. You have to explain how they're experiencing an illusion. So that doesn't get around it.
See, I think that's the homuncular fallacy, though.
I don't know about that. But you can explain.
Do you know what the homuncular fallacy is?
No.
Yeah, but I don't see actually how that is the homunculus fallacy, but you can please explain it to me.
Yeah, I might need to hear what I can look it up, actually. If you guys want to talk about it, it's all good.
Yeah, so the homuncular fallacy is the idea that experiences are something like a point of sensory observation that's monitoring something like a screen, right? And that experiences are played for that central point. Now, why I think you're sneaking that in is because, so first of all, that's considered a fallacy because it entails an infinite regress.
Yeah.
So nobody likes the homuncular fallacy. The other position is that our sensory experiences, instead of being played for something else on a screen, just is those things. Do you understand the difference there? And no matter what position you take, that has to be the answer, because the homuncular fallacy entails an infinite regress. Who's watching the watcher?
But I'm not referring to like a homunculus or a watcher. It could just be, the way I would see it is that there's multiple different ways qualia can be structured, and some qualia can better accurately, the reality can be better accurately represented within one qualia or one mind structure system over another. And it actually just is that thing, that representation, and depending on the structure, like it seems like, again, like you're kind of like...
No, it is just, I agree with you, it just is that thing.
Yeah, right? It is. Structures...
I understand that if you're saying there's a watcher inside watching the screen, then it's like, does that person have a screen, and is there a watcher watching that screen, and it goes on forever? I get what you're saying there, but I'm not persuaded that that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I don't think it is either.
Okay, sorry. Explain yourself again then.
Well, it seems to me that you just went off my saying the word screen, and you're like, screen, homuncular fallacy. Because when I think, okay, because the whole thing is, where exactly is, like, how does consciousness arise? All I'm saying is we have something called consciousness. We can't locate it physically. You say we can by just saying brain. To me, that's just brain, though. I don't actually hear a description of where it exists.
Technically, he's not
So-
just saying brain, though. He's saying brain plus data, like being inputted.
Well,
into it,
okay. I
believe.
mean, brain doing stuff with data. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know really. Like, I mean,
Well, what do you
using
mean?
terms-
Well,
Sorry?
let's take a step back. When you say you're asking about consciousness and you hear me say brain, what exactly do you mean by consciousness?
I mean, your subjective experience.
What is exactly meant by experience?
Oh, that's so hard. It's like just it's so hard to define subjectivity. It's just one of those really difficult words. It's like I can just describe what it feels like. It's like, you feel things, like weight sensations, you see, you hear. It's like a stream of senses, and then below that, just an awareness that things are arising in. That's consciousness.
Perfect. So far, everything that you've said to me sounds like it can fit at home in the theory that I'm proposing.
But
Which is why for me
but
it sounds
there-
like you're redefining everything. It's rather than.
Well, no, I'm saying
yeah.
that you have to be careful with words like consciousness because
Mhm.
on some explanations of it, you're talking about the hard problem, and on other ones, you're talking about what's commonly called access consciousness. And what I just heard said about streams of data coming into the brain is just access consciousness. And that part of quote unquote experience is uncontroversial, and I agree with it. The real question is there anything over and above that that needs to be explaining? And people like you go ahead.
I'm looking at access consciousness, just this sum total of stuff happening in consciousness: sensations, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, wants, emotions. So but consciousness is the space that's all happening in. It's like where does a sensation arise? Where does a image exist? Because I hear you're just going to say brain, but that just doesn't do it for me. It's like that's not actually explaining like the image that I'm seeing, or like the feelings that I'm feeling. It's like it's so weird. I don't always have words to describe this. It's hard to get across, but it's like
it's almost illusionary or fleeting.
I hear you capitalizing on my lack of throw that in there, like
I'm being a prick. I understand.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just fucking with you. But no, I mean, it's just there. Okay, let's just go with qualia, right? Just these like something like this color, right? That you'd call that qualia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So your subjective awareness of color that is happening somewhere.
Yeah. I
So
mean, that seems like
where
very
is it happening?
very natural for me to say in my brain. And here's a couple reasons why, right? For one, it seems indubitable at this point that brains do things like connect the outer world to the rest of our body, and its purpose, if you don't mind a little bit of evolutionary psychologizing, is moving the body around and navigating the world in such a way that we can be reproductively successful. So there's one reason to suppose that this stuff is happening in the brain, because the brain is the sort of thing that intakes information from the environment, processes it, and then it moves the body around where it ought to go.
Okay, here's a problem with
That's
what I
that's why I don't
think that's what Isaac's trying to get at. Maybe
that's why I don't think that there's anything above and beyond the scenario we just explained to consciousness. Because when you start asking, yeah, but why do you also get this extra thing that's non-identical to the brain state, then you invoke a lot of really weird needs for explanations that don't really make sense. For example, let's say the answer is, why does it happen? Well, here's a really sensible explanation. Because God wanted us to be conscious like he is. Okay? Now, you might disagree with the God hypothesis and other questions, but that's like really the only kind of explanation that would fly. Because on the view, on the question that you just asked, was asked in such a way that subjective experience isn't entailed by the physical facts. And if it's not entailed by the physical facts, then it has to have some other non-physical explanation. Great, so there's a God, or there's spirits or these other things, because it has to be non-physical. It has to be some,
but this is the whole thing of where consciousness exists is a massive trippy problem, because
I agree.
Sorry?
Oh, I agree.
I thought you said brain.
Well, that's the thing. Like, just because I'm not necessarily invoking one thing or another, but the fact that I can't point to any one area of my brain and say that's where it happens, really, I think is a problem. That is the hard problem, more or less.
Not to mention that it extends out past your brain. It extends out into your arms and your hands. And I understand there's just a functional explanation of it's just a bunch of nerves and they're relaying back to your brain and it leads you to feel there. But I think it's really hard to get at the core of why it's trippy. But it's just you're actually seeing an image, right? Like with your eyes, there is an image that you are seeing. Right? I mean, you have.
Well, no. See,
right now. So
when you say you are seeing an image, that's
okay. Here's a way to put it. Where does color exist? It doesn't have a three-dimensional physical location.
I disagree with that.
I think colors.
How do you disagree with that? It doesn't have a three-dimensional physical location.
Well,
color being your subjective experience, not the wavelengths of light that you turn into color.
Yeah. I think it would, in the sense that if you look at the entirety of my brain and if you understood how it was structured, well, the structure and the way that it's organized, the system, that system, if you understood it, you would see how it's deriving color.
Okay, wait, you might be able to see how it's creating color. That's a soft problem. So when you have, you're actually seeing color. Color actually exists somewhere. That's in your subjectivity. And where is that? So you can
within
say
the system.
Sorry?
Well, within the system that is me.
Well, that's just gobbledygook, Will.
But that's kind of a cop-out, because you're not really saying where.
You're not actually locating it within reality, right?
Yeah,
it's the system that is me. Well, does the system that is you include consciousness? Because if so, that's just working around the question.
It's kind of like if you were to take a computer. This is kind of like the way I see it. Is like you're kind of like taking a computer, you're playing like a really complex game, and then you're gonna say, well, you're gonna point to the specific transistors that represent your character in the game, and I'm like, well, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to do. It might be possible, but it's like rapidly changing, and it's some of the transistors are here, some of the transistors are here.
Wait, Will.
Yeah.
Your character, you can point to a three-dimensional location. It's on the screen. So
no, that's just that would be kind of like the light emitting it, not the system.
No, because it's not a good analogy, because if you're using the screen to analogize to subjectivity, it's not the same thing, because the screen has a physical location, and you can say that's the pixel right there, and it's made of these molecules. Mm-hmm. So with consciousness, it's not like that. So it doesn't work as an analogy. When I say where, you're seeing, colors right now, it's like, where does color exist?
Yeah, well, I think in the organization of the system is what I would say.
That's a cop out. That's not. That's not an answer.
Well, I guess maybe I am more closer to JHC. I don't know then.
Well, look, anybody who's ever, the issue is the way that it's worded and the way that we talk about qualia and subjective experience necessarily entails that there's no explanation possible. None.
No,
Nobody can have it. God could not know what it's like for JHC to put his finger into a blender, right?
Wait, no. To understand something doesn't mean that we have to be invoking the supernatural, and I think that's again.
No, I'm saying the supernatural doesn't fix it.
Yeah, but it seems like you're also saying that that it goes in the realm of you'd have to appeal to something supernatural to answer it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, earlier what I suggested is the why explanation is suggested. If the mental states are not entailed by the physical states, then the only kind of explanation is non-physical. That's what's inviting the supernatural explanation. No, I don't.
Yeah, but I think
non-physical doesn't necessarily, like, I mean, it sounds bad, but it doesn't necessarily mean supernatural, right? It could be something we don't understand. I mean,
no, but I'm saying
kind of weird dimensionality to.
No, but there's. Yeah, I understand that part. Okay, good. But I'm saying whatever you say is the actual explanation, even if you just spitball it, extra dimensions, very complex functions, no matter what, I'm going to be able to say, how do I know your consciousness? Where's consciousness happening? I'm going to be able to invoke the hard problem to literally any proposed explanation across the board.
Whoa. Not if we can locate.
How would you locate it?
Well, that's the hard problem.
Which generalizes, though. Because let's say, because the way that it's worded, what would an explanation even look like?
Wait, JHC, because the thing that you're doing is you're assuming that it's just a wording confusion. It's like the thing that makes me very, very much consider the hard problem a serious problem is my own subjective experience. So when I'm sitting here, I am seeing my speaker right now. I'm seeing the color blue. That visual perception is not just, it's not the same as just the location of the speaker. It's happening in my subjective reality. And subjective reality doesn't appear to have a physical location. It's not like there's a little, like, I don't know, like the homunculus or something. It's not like there's a little screen in my head and a little man watching it. It's like I am having my experience. I'm seeing color. I'm feeling things. When I see red exists somewhere now. It exists in my subjectivity. But where does my subjectivity exist? It's like if you can't even locate the subjectivity, you've definitely not solved the hard problem.
Right. I agree with you. And that's why I think that there's something wrong with the explananda, precisely because there's no possible explanation for why one thing is consciousness or has consciousness and another doesn't. If what you're looking for, if you're always asking, or if you're always able to ask the question, what makes this state conscious and another one not?
Okay.
And if you go through some proposed explanations.
No, because you made an assumption there. You made the assumption that we could understand the sum total of physical interactions, and that wouldn't tell us what consciousness is. That's possible also. I mean, maybe that's the case. I don't fucking know. But that's not necessarily something that I'm invoking. It could be that we find out what generates consciousness. We can, reproduce it in computers or something like this.
How would you know that a computer is conscious?
Well, I don't know what the explanation would look like.
You can't, though. That's the hard problem.
There's wait. There's obviously a gap there that relates to solipsism. You can't, deductively prove other things are sentient. You just go off evidence. What I'm saying there when I say conscious computer, I'm saying we understand well enough what generates consciousness in a human that if we organize a computer similarly, it's certain to a very high probability that it's conscious. I don't
see how that seems in principle impossible.
Okay, well,
So because how would we do that? So let's say.
Well, I don't know. I don't know the science. I mean, it's not.
Well, I'll let you make up the science.
Well, wait, because I just feel even the going into computers is getting a little. I shouldn't have even gone there. Like the
Well,
thing.
you can pick something else.
Well, it's just the thing that. Okay, so we agree that it's fundamentally not explainable where consciousness is located.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I say all the explananda are required to be explained, then yes, it is impossible to explain where, why, and how.
Okay.
All three of those are, I would say, impossible to provide an explanation for on any account.
Well, wait 1 sec. And this is, again, not like rude or anything, but how is that not an appeal to ignorance? I mean, you're assuming it's inexplicable because we don't currently have the data. Maybe it will be.
No, I'm saying it's impossible because no matter what data you ever receive back on any experiment, you're going to have the explanatory gap, which is me being able to ask the question, yeah, but why is this conscious? How do you know this is conscious?
Well, no. I mean, just to fill in there, it could be that this is going way off into sci-fi land, so I don't want people to interpret this as like, I think this is what will happen or something, but this is just like a thought experiment. We could design some kind of technology that manages to, access some kind of other dimension, and we find that we can actually manipulate the dimension that consciousness is existing in through the technology. We could come up with some.
Okay, hold on. Let's stop there because I think that's a really good example.
Okay, wait. Let me throw a tiny bit on, and then you can go crazy. We could also, just in addition to that, we could come up with some kind of mathematical or physical model that we reach through just expanding on our current scientific model, and it actually mathematically tells us that there is another dimension that exists that we don't have direct access to. But again, that allows us to create technology to manipulate it or realize it or test for whether consciousness exists in it or whatever.
Right. So let's say there's this other dimension that we can't access directly. Tell me if I make sure that I get your example right.
Yeah.
But we have some kind of instrument that's able to feed us data.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I assume this instrument isn't going to just be like a readout screen unless you really want to cheat that just says consciousness, yes or no, circle 1. Yes. You point it at somebody and it turns out it checks the other dimension. It comes back with yes. Because that's not an explanation, right? The question is what data could it possibly give us that you're going to satisfy the hard problem enthusiast who just says, how do you know that's consciousness? Those are just numbers. Those are just data points. That's not telling me where subjective experience is happening.
I feel like that's a tiny bit of a goalpost move, because what you keep doing a little bit of is wanting me to actually provide the science on some level. I know you're going to say that's not what you're doing, but kind of what would be required to answer something like that. Because I mean, if we got a extremely persuasive picture from physics, for example, and it tells us, there's actually this other level that's happening all the time. It exists on all physical space, and it's that plane where consciousness exists on, and we can, manipulate it and do things to it sufficiently that, it just becomes just abundantly obvious that we are touching consciousness when we touch this area with whatever our instrument is. I mean, it would start to look very persuasive eventually, would it not? I mean, I don't.
Well, I think it looks persuasive now, right? I think if you hit me on the head with a rock, everything blacks out. I don't think there's much of a question, but that's not an explanation.
One sec, though. You say it looks persuasive, but it only looks persuasive to you when you lower the burden of what needs to be explained. Because
no. I'm not saying I know. Sorry. I'm just saying, roughly, there's a correlation between a brain not being torn apart, say, and a person being. I'm not saying it is consciousness. I'm saying there's a correlation, which is obviously true.
Of course. Yeah. But okay, so the core thing
So I'm going to say the same thing, though.
Well, wait a sec. Puffin, can you turn your mic off? The core thing is, though, you're saying that, no worries, you're saying that you understand that we can't explain the location of consciousness, and your comeback to that is nothing we could ever do could do it, so it's not a valid question. Well, I don't accept that. If it's an unanswerable question, then it's an unanswerable question. This is why people like me, people like Sam Harris, will say, I am agnostic as to whether the hard problem is solvable. But changing the hard problem doesn't mean that you've solved what we're actually talking about. I think you know that, but...
Well, no, hold on. Not unanswerable because, like, we don't have enough data. It's unanswerable if you take the hard problem at face value. Impossible for anyone in any scenario to ever answer the question. Well, I'll just read the first couple lines from the IAP, not as like a glitch or anything, but because I think it puts it in a particularly good way.
Sure.
Hard problem of consciousness is the problem of explaining why any physical state is conscious rather than non-conscious. It is a problem of explaining why there's something is like for a subject in conscious experience, why conscious mental states light up and directly appear to the subject. The usual methods of science involve explanation of functional, dynamical, and structural properties, blah, 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 blah. But even after we have explained the functional, dynamical, structural properties of the conscious, we can still meaningfully ask the question, why is it conscious? There is nothing in principle that anybody could... This isn't a matter of being agnostic about the question. This is straight up, there is nothing that anybody could tell me that is going to make me relinquish my death grip on this question, but is it conscious? Or why is it conscious?
Okay, let's just go with that. Let's assume that's true and that it's unanswerable. Now you have an unanswerable question, and that's why it's a hard problem.
Well, yeah, not just unanswerable, like simpliciter because of like our position in the world. We could be anything. We could be God. We could know all true facts, and we wouldn't be able to know. We wouldn't be able to give a response.
No,
to the
you're slipping in that it's malformed when you...
No, I'm not.
I'm
just saying,
if you're not
even
saying it's
God...
malformed, then it's a problem.
Well, I'm saying I'm not slipping it in. I'm allowing right now, at least as a hypothetical, that the question is well formed. And this is why people...
I said malformed.
Sure, but I'm saying that it's not malformed right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying if I accept this at face value, which most people do, most people aren't like illusionists, then you're left with the position that consciousness is inexplicable. There's no explanation.
That could be possible. Well, I know you're going to say that is the case if we accept. Let's just assume that's the case. It's inexplicable. How would that make it not a problem? I mean, because you're just...
Well, it doesn't. I'm not saying it doesn't make it a problem. It just means that...
Okay, wait. Before you answer, if you're saying it's not that doesn't make it not a problem, that there is a problem there, then we're agreeing on the hard problem. So
no,
I don't...
I'm saying the fact... I'm willing to grant that we can continue talking about a world in which the hard problem is unanswerable. I just want to explore what follows from that, right? And then we can talk about maybe like why reject it or something. But if we've followed it to face value at this point, now nothing explains why one thing is conscious and another thing isn't. Now we're left with...
Sorry, just to be clear, you're saying if there is no amount of knowledge about physical facts that could explain why something is conscious and something isn't, is that what you're starting with?
Oh, this isn't just physics. This is any fact. Any system.
No, because there could be facts that we don't have access to.
And how would those explain, in principle, how one thing is conscious and another thing isn't?
Well, that's you doing the same thing again. We're really kind of asking me to create science right there. I don't know, JHC. All I can tell you is that there is a problem. I mean, we can both agree that you can't locate subjectivity, right?
Well, the locating thing is a little
You
odd.
can't locate. You can't tell why it. You said there's three things like we.
Yeah, the important part of it is the why. Right? That's what the hard problem of consciousness is why one thing is conscious and not another.
Okay, well the location thing is really interesting to me though. So just with location, you would agree we can't locate it, or at least have not located it. We
I would say we haven't located where we haven't located how it is that a representation is in the brain yet. That's not to say we don't have some clues though. We have place cells, right? So when you are traveling, say in a city, there's this thing that we do called dead reckoning, right? Which is we walk one way for a while, then we turn left, we walk a while. We're able to make our way back by completing hypotenuse, right? A kind of triangle. And we do that with these things called place cells. And these place cells are literally a mathematical map we build out when we're walking through a city. Now, this to me seems like a hint that representationalism is true. Oh, we represent locations. That's an empirical finding. How is it that I know where I am of these place cells? Where are place cells? They're in this location in the brain. That's how it works. Good. Explained at least part of that.
Okay.
Well, the question is where. So when you ask me, where do we do these things? I have some inkling how some of these activities are done and where they're stored. But if I'm being perfectly honest, no, I don't know where a red ball is in my brain.
Yeah,
right.
And there's people will try to be a bit shifty and try to talk about the ball. So if you went there, not that I think I would have just said, okay, let's take an abstract object that doesn't even have a physical location. Like you picture Mickey Mouse. Where is Mickey Mouse? I can remember tripping out about this as a child, driving with my parents and saying, like, Mom, when I picture Mickey Mouse, I see Mickey Mouse, but where is Mickey Mouse? And she thought I was fucking retarded. So maybe I don't know. But
yeah,
I'm just saying that Mickey Mouse, you're seeing it, it exists somewhere, but it doesn't have a three-dimensional location. So if you can't locate Mickey Mouse, and you're acknowledging that we can't locate that,
not can't. Haven't.
Okay, I also agree. Haven't. It's not necessarily absolutely
right.
I'm just saying if we can't locate it, then it seems to me that you're agreeing that there is a hard problem. You don't. Just to be clear, you don't deny that there's a hard problem. You just argue that we should reformulate how we think about it.
That's correct.
Okay.
I understand what people are getting at when they say, why are brains conscious but rocks aren't? Or why are humans conscious and rocks aren't? I understand what they're getting at.
Okay, yeah. So, like, I think that, when it comes, what's the best way to say this? You acknowledge that when I envision something, if I envision Mickey, that exists somewhere. It doesn't exist as matter, obviously, but it exists somewhere. I'm literally seeing it right now. I'm picturing Mickey Mouse. So I know that exists somewhere, but there's no way to physically locate it. So.
Oh, I disagree, though.
Well, no. Sorry, I'm not saying in principle. I'm just saying.
It's okay. Sorry, it hasn't been discovered yet. Yes, got it.
Sorry, that's what I mean whenever I'm talking. Yeah, so. Just with currently, we aren't locating it. So now it could be that somehow that is explained by physics, and it does exist in three-dimensional reality or something like this. It could be that it exists in some kind of other fucking, I don't know, temporal plane or some. I have no fucking idea. But the point is, I see it. The point is, it doesn't have a physical location, and wherever it is that it's existing, the bridge between physical reality and that is not clear. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the hard problem. So basically, as long as you're willing to grant me that that's a problem, you can talk about all the reformulation that you want. But as long as you're willing to actually grant that is a problem.
And let me put this clearly. I think that I have actually and people who are physicalists of a certain kind like me, who think that, qualia are what we call qualia actually are brain states. I actually think we have the burden of proof, right? I think
sorry,
that it's...
I agree they're brain states. I'm just tripped out by their location, but sorry, go on.
Yeah, but I agree that we have the burden of proof, right? If you're going to be reformulating a question, especially that other people take to be very straightforward and they can understand, and you're saying that there's something wrong with the question, I agree that it is a problem, and I have the burden of proof of explaining it. And I'll also agree that as of right now, I don't have an explanation.
Okay, I didn't even need you to accept the burden. If you acknowledge that is a problem, that's all I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we have to shut down an entire wing of the literature and say, like, this was all, like, postmodern fluff or something. I'm not saying that. I think it's reasonable to ask.
Yeah, Isaac,
Yeah.
I when you say location, one thing that, like, the reason why I get thrown off by that, and like I say, system, like a complex system, is basically, here's just what I'm basically referring to. When you say location, to some sense, that really doesn't make sense, because there's so many emergent properties. Like even a basic small like formula, something like this. It's just those gliders at the end is an emergent phenomena of a simple program where that wasn't something that's necessarily accounted for in a very simple algorithm. And where it says the overall behavior of a system of elements is not predicted by the behavior of individual elements, and such systems may be open, it may be difficult or impossible to define system boundaries. You really have to look at the system as a whole without actually, it doesn't even make sense to look at any specific system outside of its structure. It can become irrelevant to how it actually operates or the effects that it will produce. Yeah.
Well, I'm so sorry, but I am just not hearing anything that addresses the hard problem right now. Where is Mickey Mouse located? When
I'm saying that it is the structure itself, the system,
that's not even like a coherent, like, I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. Like, I mean, like, you acknowledge that right now I'm visualizing Mickey Mouse. I see Mickey Mouse.
Yeah.
Where is Mickey Mouse?
I think qualia is structure. All of qualia is
okay, but
data.
Well, can I explain why that's a really unsatisfying answer? So, like, for example, if we talk about the like wave particle duality of light, and I say, why is it that light has these two properties about it, simultaneously, and it's as though, and imagine if you just the answer to me and said, it is the light. Of the light. It is the system that is light. I mean, that would just be a deeply unsatisfying answer. That wouldn't actually explain how those properties come about.
Thank you. Because it's just
no worries.
Like the words you're saying are interesting, and you got a lot of good knowledge there, but it's just not actually addressing the problem. Like, I just want to get you.
I do think it's fundamentally different, though, because what I'm saying is it's different.
Actually, not, because what you're saying that the explanation behind why the properties of the thing exist is just purely encompassed by the thing. That doesn't actually really explain anything.
Yes, it's just words.
I mean, not really, because complexity science and complex systems, complex adaptive systems, like, this is a field of science in and of itself.
Yeah.
But
Will, I don't mean to be a dick, but where is Mickey Mouse? I mean, it's just that simple. You don't know. You have no fucking answer to that. And you can say in the system, but that doesn't actually have any information content. And that's just what I'm a being and I'm a system and I have consciousness, and the Mickey Mouse is like, okay, so where the fuck is that?
Well, you would have to understand how
all I want to get from you
system
is just
works.
I got from JHC, which I don't actually know if JHC changed his position or if we just figured out what his position is and then it became less crazy seeming once I figured it out. But what I want is just to hear the same thing from you that we just heard from him, which is that locating Mickey Mouse is not something that we have currently solved.
No.
Okay.
No, we don't understand consciousness or sentience.
No,
we don't understand these complex adaptive systems. No, we don't understand how these complex adaptive systems work, but we know that it is a product of that. Yeah.
No one's denying that. Of course, it's a product of it. We know if you fucking punch a hole in my brain, I'm not going to be visualizing Mickey Mouse. Okay, if you're saying that, that's fine. It seemed like you're trying to hand wave the hard problem away. As long as you're acknowledging that's an unanswered question, that's fine with me.
No, I'm not. Yeah.
And just to reiterate, it's not that, like, we all agree that it's a product of these complex systems. It's just that what we're trying to get down to is why is it a product of those systems? I
think it's so funny when you can see someone waiting to come in, like just turning their mic on and off repeatedly, just waiting.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all good. More than one of you are doing it.
I do want to make sure too, though, that we understand that the hard problem is more than just it's not currently explained or we don't know where this happens.
Or we don't know if it can be explained or not.
How does like phenomenal or phenomenological or whatever subjective experience arise from matter? That's it.
Yeah, it's that the big worry is that no matter what data you get, no matter what theory you put forward, somebody will always be able to ask, how do I know that this is conscious, right? And that's what's so troubling about the hard problem, is that it's supposed to cast aspersions on any theory of consciousness, right? A lot of times it's pointed specifically at physicalists, but if you read Chalmers, when he first wrote about zombies, he was like, I don't know. It takes out dualism. It takes out non-reductive physicalism. It takes out emergentism. It takes out everything. I guess for now, I'm just going to say the entire universe is conscious, and it's just a brute fact about everything, right?
Yeah.
And he's just like, fuck it, like everything's conscious. There's no explanation. I don't need any explanation of why I am conscious in particular, because thank God everything is conscious, right? Now, there are actually people raise the hard problem for panpsychism too, right? Which is, why is it that when I get enough atoms together, these little bits of experience add up and become a conscious mind?
Okay, wait, I gotta add a little there, which is, it's not just combining a clump of matter. A mountain's fucking huge. It's a clump of matter in a specific organization.
Yeah, well, anything that you add, you're going to be able to just say, what explains why that's conscious, right? There's no theory in principle that can answer the hard problem, except the brute fact account, which is like, there is no explanation, which, if you want to call that an explanation, whatever. But maybe that's it, right? Maybe it's just a roll of the dice and we're all lucky, and it's just a brute fact about...
I'm not totally on board with that. It could be that there's no way to explain it, but it could be that, again, we develop some kind of instrument to actually become aware of knowledge we're not aware of right now, and it does get explained.
I think that would be rejected outright by a proponent of the hard problem. No matter what reading that instrument comes back on, they're going to say, how do I know that's consciousness? How do I know? There's no physical fact that you can point to. There's no data that's going to say conscious or not conscious. It's going to say something else.
But you keep doing this thing where, like, I've already gotten, like, with the main thing I want from this, so I don't need to fight too much on this because this isn't that important now. But like, you keep doing this thing where it puts this burden on me to generate the science, and it's like, I'm not going to. No, because you're trying. I get what you're trying to say, that it's in principle unanswerable if you like. I get what you're saying. So I don't have to generate the science. It's just no matter what, there would be no way to detect it. But it just seems to me like that is making assumptions about what potential future technology could do. I mean, who the fuck knows, man? Maybe we will find some way to detect it. And I don't know exactly how, and I don't know how it would be that it is persuasive to people, but it's possible that we will find a way to solve it.
But see, you're just not accepting the hard problem then. Now you're the one not accepting it. Now I'm the believer, and you're the skeptic.
Well, no. I currently believe the hard problem is there, but I'm just saying, like, to me, when I think hard problem, I think, how does consciousness arise? So it could be that there is no physical explanation for it. It's something happening in some other place, and we can't actually. There's no amount of knowledge, like natural knowledge, that could explain it. That is a possibility, but I don't take that to be the only framing of it. It could be that it is ultimately explainable in terms of matter, and there's something that'll make it clear that we just haven't figured out yet. And even with the other ones, I hear you trying to say that for principle people could never accept an answer, but it seems to me like, who knows what we'll create? What if we create some instrument that detects it and that can map your mind into the dimension where all the consciousness is, and your mind can fly around in that dimension and connect to other conscious? Like, if we built something like that, you'd be like, okay, I think we solved it. Like, you know what I mean? So I don't like to assume things about what is unsolvable. It's hard to. I'm just not on board with that. I don't know.
It just sounds like, though, you're saying if, like, you saw the right thing, you would then know which things are conscious and which things aren't. And what you said there is, and I'm not trying to be a super literalist, but when you said, I saw consciousness in this other dimension, I'm just going to ask, how do you know that was conscious?
Imagine if it was literally your consciousness can imagine if we created something that could map your consciousness into some kind of, like who knows if it would ever operate like this physically, but I'm just saying a sci-fi solution. You make something that could map your consciousness. You transmit it to machine substrate, and that machine works like a kind of projector that projects into the dimension where consciousness is occurring. And you've seen this stuff about how, the brain might be divisible, and there's like other potential unconscious areas of it and stuff like this, like split brain, and then one hand can write one thing and the other write something else. Are you aware of all this shit? And they talk possibility of connecting consciousness and stuff. Is that something that you have massive skepticism about, or is that does that seem within the realm of possible?
Well, it just seems to be kind of a red herring in terms of answering the hard problem.
Okay, I'm not trying to answer it with that.
Sure. Sorry. No. I accept split brain cases.
Okay, so imagine, split brain. That's what I'm talking about. You always got the words, man. Okay. Imagine we create some kind of machine. It projects your consciousness into wherever this plane is that the rest of consciousness is happening. And it actually allows you to move around and merge into other consciousness. So you're out there as consciousness, flying around in this dimension, connecting to other consciousness, experiencing it, drifting out of it. If we created something like that, people would be like, wherever the fuck that machine projects to, that is where consciousness is. How it arises, I guess maybe that wouldn't answer the arising problem, so maybe there's still more there, but it would answer the location problem, at least. Even if you don't know how you get from one location to the other by building the right types of molecular organizations, it would answer the question of, there is a here, and we can navigate around it. So I'm just saying, like, when you say that it's just if we accept the hard problem as formulated, that it would just be fundamentally impossible to ever find any kind of thing that would prove to us that we've just at least found consciousness, even if we can't explain the arising, that we've located what is consciousness. That seems I just don't see how you're getting to that. I don't.
Well, I'd be okay with us saying we have found where consciousness is. I can accept that. So if you point your machine, if I were to sit in it and point it at your head, and my consciousness goes into the other dimension, and then all of a sudden I merge with you, and I know what it's like to have yelled at a dirty old Frenchman pseudo-philosopher on YouTube.
I didn't yell at him, but yeah.
I now know that, this phenomena of what it's like happened over here, right?
Yeah.
In the direction of your brain.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I just don't think that answers the hard problem.
If the hard problem is the arising problem, no, you're actually. But you were saying that there's nothing that you would ever be able to go, that is consciousness, and that is a case where you would actually go, that is consciousness. The arising problem.
Well, yeah. So let's pretend. Let's say that there's a super skeptic, right? And he's like, oh, what's happening is we're living in a solipsistic universe, and he has all of the memories stored in physical form, but nobody's experiencing them. And when your consciousness was pointed at his brain and jumped over there, those things were experienced for the very first time. And that's actually, Isaac is actually an empty husk of a man.
Yeah, you can, but the thing is, going to solipsism, I hear that, and if you go to that level, that's like the kind of level of fundamental philosophical doubt that you can just apply to basically anything, right? Like, we're talking about just an explanation that would satisfy everyone to the same degree that general scientific explanations do.
Yeah, so I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you that what we're doing with the hard problem is we're essentially raising our epistemological dukes ready for battle, come what may. No reasonable person will penetrate our armor. I agree with you. That's what's happening. That's one reason why I don't particularly like it. Because for me,
fair enough, yeah.
I see, like, I assume that you right now are conscious, right?
Thank you.
Now, but you're welcome. But I actually, if some jerk skeptic is like, yeah, but how do you know? And I'm like, well, because he acts like he's yeah, but what if he's a philosophical zombie? What if he's a zombie and he just acts as if he's conscious, but in fact, the lights are off inside, right? I'm like, look, stop being...
that I'm a pea zombie.
Wait, let him finish his point.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, look, I can't satisfy you. If you're going to be an extraordinary skeptic, there is nothing that I can say to satisfy. I'm sorry. I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat. I don't know that I'm not in the Matrix. I don't know that I'm God thinking up something while he's bored sitting on the toilet. I have no idea, right? I cannot solve problems of extreme skepticism.
Yes.
And if you just read the first couple pages of the IEP, they're like, yeah, but you can always ask meaningfully, why is it conscious? And I'm just like, look, I don't know what to tell you. It acts like a duck, it quacks like a duck, walks like one. I think it's a duck. You know, but there's a gap there.
I think we're close to on the same page. Will, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I can just confirm that I do not have qualia. I just checked, wasn't there, just to let you know.
Oh, okay.
Right. And this is more of the transition from like visual stimulus as the soft problem versus your experience of Mickey Mouse as you recollect him as the hard problem.
So that's a weird way to frame it, but okay.
Would you accept that?
Well, the soft problem are correspondence problems. What brain activity corresponds to what subjective experience? The hard problem is how does it arise?
Right. So the proposition that I would make, the closer I would try and get it, is that it's tied to the physiology of the transactions that take place along your neurological pathways. So, and that's sort of tied to the... Pardon?
That's a soft answer.
Okay.
Yeah. You're talking about the brain activity that produces it. You're not actually explaining the location.
So the location would be the exact physiology of that transaction between the neurons that make up your experience of that, and it would change and fluctuate and be modulated based on
you think Mickey Mouse exists between neurons?
not between, but as an it arises from the amount of time it takes. Sort of the idea, it based on. It's like a track. It's like you reading your experience of how long it takes to do that and what you get when you get it back, and your perception of that.
It sounds like
amalgamation. I'm probably not getting too close.
No, I'm not being rude. It sounds like golf. Like I'm asking where is it located, and you don't fucking know where it's located. And if you did, you'd have a no. We don't know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. No, I definitely can't locate it. I can try and explain where it arises from.
Process of all of this complex shit happening. It's like, yeah, we agree. It's the product of a bunch of crazy shit happening in the brain, for sure. But that doesn't explain.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think I try and get a little closer with like the temporal bit of it, but no, I totally agree with you. It doesn't answer where is it at all.
Okay, well, you won't be banned.
I just realized how much a better way to explain exactly the nature of what I was specifying earlier. To say that consciousness arrives within the universe would also be true. To say that some matter, has what I'm experiencing, that kind of consciousness, whatever that is, would be true, and some other matters don't have this. And when JHC refers to, well, he's referring to the brain, and I'm just kind of. But what I do is like, well, I only take it a little bit further in the sense that I'm making the distinction between because there's matter and there's energy, but that's not and then there's the properties of the universe, what are and all of those. But there's another type of thing in the sense that there is information or patterns, and there are patterns that produce effects outwards, and all I'm basically saying is that is the type which is specifically relevant when we're talking about consciousness. Like, it's not so much the we're not talking about like where specifically within just matter. It's not specific magical properties of matter which in and of themselves, like, it's not like I can point to like just an H2O molecule and tell you how like water dynamics work. It doesn't kind of like work in a vacuum like that. You have to kind of look at the system in and of itself. I suppose that's the only. It's really not much of a, like, I'm not getting much closer. It's just talking about the relevant category, I guess, because I think that's important. But yeah, it doesn't solve the hard problem, of course.
Yeah, it's just, I'm sorry, Will, it's not doing it. I'm just not hearing the location. I just want to ask JHC one last thing, and then I'll talk to you more about that, because he said he's got to dip out. He's going to bed.
I should have dipped out.
I'm under the impression that philosophical, I almost called him philosophical retard. I'll try not to, that philosophical vegan has messaged you. What is your impression of that?
Let me see what he said.
It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of gum.
I'd be happy to explain the problems I see with NTT in more detail and see if you have any thoughts. Sent me a couple messages here.
What's your takeaway? I'm just curious what your read on.
Well, I've been asked to give public statements essentially on the argument and their response to it, and my preference is to not make public statements and to be enticed to be used as some kind of like citation for any side.